All right, folks, here we go. We are continuing with the Mania of WrestleMania. I am your host, the man data reporter, and frankly, I'm mortified, Mr. Mark Radulich. And we are looking at WrestleMania 14 X rated, WrestleMania 15, the Ragin Climax, and WrestleMania 2000, or WrestleMania 16, or the McMahon family feud, however you like it. Tonight, as you can see, if you're watching this on video, I am joined by Stewart from 411mania.com. How do you do, sir?
Hi everyone. Hi Mark. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I'm really pleased and excited to be here for these three manias. The Pete Rose trilogy. And I'm not even kidding. I'm not even joking. That's not an ironic statement. Like I'm genuinely really excited to talk about the three most perfect WrestleManias in a row. I think this I'll set my stall out with that quite early. So yeah,
All right, hot
thanks
take.
very much for having me.
No, you reached out to me when you I guess you'd been watching the series, and you was like, hey, when you guys get to 14, 15, 16, please have me on because I want to talk about this. And now I want to hear what you're so passionate about these three particular WrestleManias for. What made you decide to jump on tonight?
So, I mean, aside from the obvious point of being able to
Mm.
get back onto a podcast with yourself, Mark, um, you know, little bit of love there. Um, these shows, I would say, came at like quite an important time. I say in my life generally, but it was important um, for sort of getting into wrestling and the availability of wrestling. Like as you can probably tell from my accent, if you're listening or watching, I'm not from the US. I'm from Scotland, and the availability of wrestling up to the late '90s was very much it was either reliant on videotapes or knowing someone who had satellite or having satellite yourself. And I kind of was stuck with the first one. So while I watched wrestling up to this point, there was no order to it. There was no real continuity to my watching. So I'd very much watch the shows in their own bubble. So it would start with WrestleMania 3 in the early '90s was probably the first wrestling I remember watching, and it would suddenly jump to 5, and then a SummerSlam, and then a King of the Ring tournament a few years later. So it was all out of order. It was all out of whack, and I knew who these guys were, but I didn't watch the show until WrestleMania 15 properly. It was the first time that I was able to get access to the recordings, to the tapes, and to the
Mhm.
pay-per-views as they were happening. So my wrestling fandom, for better or worse, started 23 years ago in earnest with WrestleMania 15.
I was telling Pat on our last show the era that we covered before this, the new generation eras, were probably like my dimmest memories of wrestling. I had watched wrestling as a kid. As we documented this series, I've talked about. I grew up watching wrestling in the '80s with Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant, Million Dollar Man. Like I used to watch all of that on Saturday night's main event. As it was happening. Living in New York, I watched the Superstars of Wrestling on whatever this syndicated channel was in New York at the time. So all of that stuff I grew up with, and then all my friends liked wrestling, and I watched it all the way through junior high. I can remember being at my friend's confirmation party, and we watched WrestleMania 6, and I can still remember my dad talking about like, is this match ever going to end? he took a dim view of wrestling in total.
Yeah.
But I but I remember like probably around the time of the steroid trial and thereafter, like those years where they were bringing in guys like Diesel and Razor, the 1-2-3 Kid, the early days of Raw. I just didn't watch, so that's a lot of high school for me. I think by the time I hit high school, I had kind of just gotten past wrestling and didn't follow it. What got me back in 1996 was the I started watching around the build up to WrestleMania 12, and I saw all these new guys coming in, like Mick Foley, Steve Austin. The Rock will show up at I think the '96 Survivor Series in New York
Yeah.
City, which I was there live for that with Sean and Sid. So all these new characters are coming in, and I'm really taking a liking to especially when Steve Austin, which is really like the big part of the subject we're going to be talking about tonight. This is the Austin era years. When he makes the switch from the Ringmaster to Stone Cold, and then he has that feud with poor Brian Pillman, the old Pillman's got a gun segment.
Wow, yeah.
I was riveted at that point. Between Brian Pillman pulling a gun on Steve Austin and all the stuff that was happening with the NWO in 1996, Monday night was must-see TV for me.
Yeah.
And then I stuck with it. And then 97, I don't know if you still, I had given up listening to the Bruce Pritchard podcast a long time ago for a variety of reasons. But
yeah,
when I was listening, Conrad had said at the time, he was like, 1997 might be like his most favorite year in wrestling. And that's where we ended our last show, and where we're going to pick up this one, because 97 really is like 96, 97 are really like the prologue to what we're talking about. We covered that on our last show, but it's the end of the new generation and like the beginnings of Attitude. But it's really after WrestleMania 13 that you have the big Shawn Bret like blood feud. You have Bret who had turned heel at WrestleMania 13. They did the big double turn with him and Austin in their submission match, where infamously you had Austin wearing the crimson mask and bleeding out of his head, and he wouldn't give up and all that. Did you want to jump in?
No, not at all. Sorry, no.
Okay. So and then after that, Bret Hart. That's also the infamous Shawn loses his smile, and he's in and he's out, and no one knows what he's doing, and he says he's retiring, and then he's not. And then he would come back, I think, over the summer. But 1997 sees a lot of big things happen. You have evil Canadian Hart Foundation Bret Hart, where he's doing promos in the middle of the ring saying Canada's great, US stinks, and he's only a heel in everywhere but Canada.
My favorite. That's my favorite Bret Hart, I have to admit.
That's like everyone's favorite Bret Hart.
Yeah, I will say I kind of agree with Pat with Bret Hart. I'm not gonna lie here. Yeah, that's all I'll say on that just now. I was hoping you'd be here for me to agree with him on that, but
yeah, we've kidded about Bret Hart taking things just a wee bit too seriously. But yeah, he's great as Canadian hero, American anti-hero Bret Hart. That whole Hart Foundation year, I think, was it 97 was the year of the Canadian Stampede?
97 was, yeah, 97. I'd be lying if I told you the month. I feel like I'm like mixing
it had to have been
Survivor
July.
Series.
I think it was July.
That it was definitely 97.
Yeah, we'll go through it because I believe the Canadian Stampede leads into the SummerSlam where Shawn kicked the Undertaker in the face, and then we'll go. I'll go over it momentarily, but I feel like the Canadian Stampede was like everyone's favorite pay-per-view for like the next decade.
I mean, probably the best one-match show in wrestling history. I would say maybe that or probably the '92 Rumble.
Mm-hmm. Which we'll be talking about
for just one match carrying it to this upper tier of pay-per-view history kind of level,
And if you just sold a VHS of just that match, people would buy it. Like nobody cares about the rest of it.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think I could tell you one other
Rumble.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't tell you one other match on either of those shows without having my memory prodded slightly, I think. So, yeah, I think that says a lot.
So the summer of 97, like I said, Shawn and Triple H start doing their backstage antics in front of the camera, and you get Degeneration-X. And so you've got the Hart Foundation, you've got Degeneration-X, and then you've got the rise of Steve Austin as a face, as a hero character. So you've got like 3 hot characters or groups in 1997.
Yeah.
Just to kind of chronicle things here. The next show after, the other thing that's happening during this year is that the Undertaker had won the belt from Sid at WrestleMania 13 because he was like the least worst option at the time. He is in like a blood feud with Mick Foley, and they have a return match. I feel like their last return match for a while at the next pay-per-view, which is In Your House 14, Revenge of the Taker.
Wow, that's such a dreadful name for a show.
Whoa.
Revenge of the Taker. Yeah, it sounds like the 19th Halloween movie or something, you know. Awful. Absolutely awful. Funnily, you guys were talking about it on the last show about like Taker kind of being put into this like kind of giant slaying kind of gimmick, you know, and he was getting pegged with guys like Giant Gonzalez and stuff through a lot of this era, and it's such a waste when you consider that, you know, I know he didn't become probably the Undertaker really until around the Attitude Era, really, in terms of that sort of you know, aura behind him and the sort of, you know, the locker room leader kind of character as well. But I just say it's such a wasted opportunity through that era.
They weren't really using him as a guy; they were using him as an attraction. So it was like, what monster can we put with the Undertaker this time? You know, it was always like, what attraction are we going to make out of the Undertaker? He becomes like a fully formed character during this era, and that's another fun thing. Like, you know, I know Pat and some of the other guys I interact with are not huge fans of the Undertaker's wrestling, but you can't argue that from like 13 on, for a very long time, the Undertaker is not an attraction. He is a main character in this play that they're telling, and a lot of it's great. Like, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but like his Ministry of Darkness era, first of all, that's always like my favorite theme.
Yeah. You know, yeah. Well, I'll take that and raise you the Corporate Ministries theme.
Okay.
Otherwise, yeah, I mean, it definitely up there. Although the Corporate Ministries theme's a bit of a jam.
So this In Your House 14, the big ones here are the Undertaker defeats Mankind and for the title in about 20 minutes, and then Steve Austin has a return match with Bret Hart, which ends in disqualification. And then that leads to the following month, which is Cold Day in Hell, which is Steve Austin's shot at the title. And the Undertaker ends up defeating him in about 20 minutes, which I remember, from what I remember, it was a fairly decent match. The Undertaker and Steve Austin, for the most part, worked pretty well together. And that leads us to the King of the Ring 1997, which the only thing that really comes out of this, if I remember correctly, is God, this was 97 was quite the mixed bag. But we start to see, you know, the amalgamation of like the new Hart Foundation. I think this is where we started getting those promos, like where Bret Hart's trying to mend fences with everybody, and, you know, make this big group of him, Owen, Jim Neidhart, and the Bulldog, and then Brian Pillman would be added. So that's what's happening around this time. Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels are in a tag team, I think. Though they fought each other in this show, and it ends in the double disqualification. But then I think they ended up being a tag team, or they were a tag team prior to that. The Undertaker defeated Farouk in a match nobody cared about. But the big thing
for
here,
Farouk and his family.
Yeah. the big thing here, that the only real thing of note, especially with what we're going to talk about as the show progresses, is last year at the 96 King of the Ring, allegedly Triple H was supposed to win the thing, but he gets delayed a year, which Pat and I talked about that the last show. Like, when you know, Triple H just told the story about the curtain call so many times, like, oh, I was punished. It was like, okay, once again, the hog pen stuff happened well before that. And your punishment lasted a whole month. By the next year, you're being primed to be in like either the upper mid card or the main event. Please quit your bitching, sir.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like he wasn't really hurting after the curtain call. I really don't think. I mean, aside from the planned King of the Ring win being pushed, and again, that's probably a little bit of allegedly in there as well. I think, you know, the guy was very strongly rehabbed very, very quickly. If it was the case that he was punished, and certainly by the time Mania 14 rolls round, there's no distinguishable blemishes on his resume, really, aside from the same kind of junk that everyone went through having survived the new generation, you know.
Right. I was gonna say, like, isn't 97 his big, like, his big match on Raw with quote unquote Cactus Jack?
90, yeah, that was was that after? I feel like that was after the summer, if memory serves me right.
I want to say it was around September, because I think it's around the same time. It's after SummerSlam where Steve cracks his neck, and so I think it's the same, because I was at that Raw, and it's the same episode where I think Steve Austin has to turn the title over to McMahon, and that's the first time he ever stuns him. Which you want to see a place come unglued. Like, people talk about now, like, oh my God, CM Punk walking out on Rampage on AEW in the place, men were crying, babies were being thrown in the air. People were born again. I was there in 97 when Steve Austin stunned McMahon, and we almost burnt the garden down. Like, it was rough.
The one thing I'll drop in at this juncture, I mean, I think we'll have plenty of chance for it to come up again over the next, 2.5 years, but considering he spent such a long time in a program with Steve Austin, I don't think there's anyone who took the stunner as badly as Vince McMahon. And I know I know he's not a wrestler. I know that.
Sure.
But also, like, considering it's maybe the hottest, most profitable angle in wrestling history, if we're honest about it. Those stunners,
funny,
man. Oh my.
They're taking the stunner badly, like Scott Hall at WrestleMania 18. He takes the stunner and throws himself just out of the ring, yelling, I regret nothing. Then there's the way Vince McMahon took it, where, like, Steve Austin hit him with the stunner, and every bone in his body seemed to have broke.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe the one positive about the way that Vince takes a stunner, and I would maybe argue to a point, I've got a feeling that Sergeant Slaughter took one in a similar way, if memory serves me right. But I would suppose it made it look pretty real. Like, I think that Steve had to really hit that move for real to get them to react like that. There was no which we'll get to. There was no Rocky Maivia theatrics. There was no Scott Hall overselling. There was just I need you to go down for this move, and I need you to sell it. So your neck's coming with me, Vince. Sarge, whoever took it.
Don't get too attached to your neck, because I'm going to shove my shoulder right into it.
Exactly.
So we're building towards SummerSlam 1997 here. We have Shawn back full time, and Shawn and the Undertaker are going to carry the fall into Survivor Series. But before we get there, the last great WWF Bret Hart memory. This is really like the end of his career in terms of a high point. And I want to take a moment just to reflect on that, because when you think about what's going to happen next to poor old Bret Hart, as he carries the title into Survivor Series, this is the last, like, really good high profile memory I have of the guy. He's in the main event with the Hart Foundation in Canada. This is the Canadian Stampede. This is the show we were talking about a few minutes ago. That's like everyone's favorite show of this era. It's the Hart Foundation versus this mixed up mix of a team. Ken Shamrock, Goldust, the Road Warriors, and Steve Austin. And of course, that's 25 minutes and they get beat. Same show, The Undertaker defended the title against Vader before he completely loses standing with the company. But
what a missed opportunity. Realistically, the fact that that's probably the only time that his name is going to come up on this show.
Vader.
I just feel like such a ridiculously dropped ball. I had such a dropped ball by the company with Vader. Like, the guy was legit. The guy had a look. The guy had an entrance. And I think that coming into this era, I mean, I know that there was the kind of larger than life entrances and stuff, but I mean, when Vader came out, you noticed, with the big helmet and everything, he was different.
Jim Cornette said that backstage he didn't do himself a tremendous amount of favors. I mean, and I don't disagree with you. I think all things being equal and everyone behaving the way they're supposed to, like I've said about the Warrior, sure, Vader could have been especially coming up. Like, once you get rid of Shawn and his pansy ass, and Brett leaves, and you need solid main eventers for Steve Austin, which I will hit upon this again, because the 98 run with Steve Austin is very much like, well, we've got this great baby face. We've got the leader of this company. He is putting us on his back and taking us to the moon. And then it's like, okay, well, who's he going to fight? Oh, crap. We have no heels. Not a one.
Yeah.
Vince, we have a problem. But like, can you imagine like the day after WrestleMania and he starts a feud with Vader, like a primed, ready Vader, as opposed to one who had fallen to pieces by then? But yeah, like Pat and I talked about this in '96, how much like they didn't really they tried investing in Vader, and I think it's half, Shawn and half just Vader's own behavior. And so by '97, he was like Yokozuna was a few years before that. Just all right, we're done with you now. But going back to this, this is the last one. Just anything else about before we move on from this? Anything else about the Canadian Stampede and how great that match was?
I mean, that's realistically all that can be said about that show. Let's be completely honest about it. It's the only thing that stands the test of time with it at all. I think that, as you said, it's notable only for the fact that it's Bret Hart's last real positive interaction within the company. Before what comes later in the year. And yeah, I mean, the epitome of a one match event, 100%. But also, what a match! One of the best of the '90s for sure.
So, after Bret Hart dropped the title to Shawn at WrestleMania 12 and then went away and did Lonesome Dove and stuff like that, then he comes back and he's feuding with Austin, and then he's supposed to have a return match at 13 with Shawn, but Shawn's a jerk, so it doesn't happen. Also, The Undertaker nearly breaks his back in the process. So, little halfsies, little from column A, little from column B. But, Bret's gone a long time without the title now. And, and again, kind of looking at this era, Bret Hart is your number one heel in the company. And so he gets, he's going to get his shot with The Undertaker coming up at this SummerSlam. But they gotta, but they're going to, from there, they're going to build the story, and they have all summer with Shawn and Bret. They're going to build towards their return match finally at Survivor Series. But it starts in a very weird way because, let me go back. So we have SummerSlam 1997, which is known for, again, a couple of things. One, this is the end of the Undertaker run with the title for a real long time. This is the mixing back up of Bret and Shawn. They put the title back on Bret, but that's only because he's going to drop it to Shawn later. And presumably one of them was going to drop it to Austin at the following WrestleMania, but we'll get there. This is also the infamous pay-per-view where Steve Austin gets the sit-out pile driver from Owen Hart and cracks his neck, and he's like his entire run. We almost don't have the next couple of years because of this. Like this was touch and go with whether or not he was even going to be able to continue wrestling, if I remember correctly. What do you remember of the Owen Hart pile driver on Steve Austin?
So, I mean, I kind of mentioned at the start, a lot of my wrestling knowledge, memories from pre-15 are more, they came afterwards. So it was more so after that, digging back and going back through the years that you started piecing together the jigsaw and how these things all came. And if it wasn't for, ending up becoming a bit of a nerd about it, there's these things that you don't, that you don't pick up on. You don't realize that Austin cracked his neck against Owen, and who Owen even was at that stage. You just so I mean, a lot of that was picked up in the last the few years after becoming addicted and having access to the shows again and such. So I mean, I'll be honest with you, getting into it, I was never the biggest Austin fan.
Okay.
And really? I'll kind of hold my hands up to that. Yeah, like, don't get me wrong, I didn't dislike the guy, but I mean, I think that especially in the UK, like around the sort of WrestleMania 15 kind of era when I started getting into it all, the Rock was the star. Yeah. Whether he was the heel, the face, whatever he wanted, the Rock was the star, and you knew that this guy was something worth watching, in some capacity. And as a result, here, without prior knowledge to the characters or the performers, Austin was the secondary character in wrestling at that stage. Quickly, I would realize otherwise, and it was then I sort of developed, an appreciation more for him. But yeah, I just think that it's just shows you how close it could have been to a completely different landscape. Austin sits out through 14 to 15. We probably don't have the Attitude Era properly,
No.
and if we do, it's an Attitude Era that's driven by DX and the same sort of backstage politics that Shawn Michaels brings to his company during the 90s.
I was
And
gonna
it's
say,
a very different thing.
when you think about what's going to happen between Survivor Series and WrestleMania 97 and 98, if you don't have Austin, who do you have? Because Bret's going to go,
Yeah.
Shawn's going to be out. You don't have. I mean, I guess you go back to the Undertaker. I mean, who's left? Because Rock's not ready. Triple H isn't ready. They're going to be ready by the end of the year, as we know, because we know what's going to happen the years after. But I mean, you've now had a year or two of the Undertaker and Mick Foley. You're going to get 2 to 3 more years of the Undertaker and Mick Foley.
I mean, I think that realistically, and a bit of a what if, and this is kind of purely on the spot, I'm thinking of this, but one name that sticks out as a potential push for the end of 97 with no Hart, Michaels, well, no Hart, no Austin, is Ken Shamrock at that point in his career. I think, and it sounds kind of scary to mention it as potentially him being the number 2 name in the company, but the guy was legit. He'd just come off of his UFC run and wanted the schedule of the wrestling, and the guy was in that Canadian Stampede match.
I was gonna say, can you imagine a world where Ken Shamrock gets Brock Lesnar's push? I mean, and he's like your head guy in the company. And suddenly I want to live in that universe.
That's the multiverse I want to be in.
I'm gonna just toss this out there, but I'm not gonna hit the ball for another few minutes because it's part of the Survivor Series conversation. But when you think about the Montreal Screw Job, had people been rational, the obvious choice was to have put the belt on Shamrock, but it didn't happen. And because I even think Jim Cornette was like, why don't we just put the belt on Shamrock, then we'll just have him lose to Shamrock? Because even if you did Bret versus Shamrock on Raw, and and Shawn cost them the title, and then it's Shamrock and Shawn at the December pay-per-view or at the Survivor Series, it's like, okay, fine, just whatever we need to get this story moving along. And it's and it's kind of like when Austin talks about the Brock Lesnar thing, and it's like, well, I don't like the creative. Okay, but you've never said what the creative was. They when they're like, well, why don't we just put the belt on Shamrock, and then Jim Cornette will start talking about something else, like, well, why didn't they put the belt on Shamrock? What was the reasoning? Like, never talk about that.
At this point, from a sort of maybe a bit of a revisionist history, but Shamrock was still fairly well protected at this stage within the company. He hadn't been, I think certainly perhaps by 14, but certainly by 15, he had fallen into that Intercontinental / European title sort of slot. He was very much a strong mid-card hand at this stage by the time that rolls around. But late 97, the guy's legit. And it would have taken very little at all to make him look like an absolute killer in the eyes of the fans. If you looked at another way you said about giving him the Brock Lesnar push, what if we give him the Kurt Angle push? Even as an existing talent, if Shamrock is away from TV a couple of weeks, comes back, hits that ankle lock, funnily enough, and starts tapping people out, especially if it's guys with a name behind them as well, guys in the company at the time. I know that we'll get to The Rock in a moment with him, but the guys such as Triple H, for example's sake, give him Vader at this point. If Vader's still in the company, he's on the way out. He's not favored backstage.
We never got Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, which breaks my heart.
It literally I think that there's not a match that writes itself easier than that, other than Hogan Flair.
Yeah.
In terms of
One of the,
just really easy storytelling. That's it.
great missed opportunities. I want to live in the world where WrestleMania 15, because so Austin gets the pile driver, breaks his neck, never comes back. They got to figure out what to do, and Shamrock ends up being the guy instead. And then the end of WrestleMania 15, the main event of WrestleMania 15 is Shamrock Severn. Oh, pants everywhere. Just
yeah. I mean, the thing with that is, and now I know we're kind of talking about it, in a what if situation, but realistically, if you think about what that would mean to Shamrock's push and how he would be presented through late '97 through 1998, it would probably have transitioned into being a very Austin-esque push anyway. I mean, certainly I think that there wouldn't have been a great deal of difference between characters with a legitimately serious and protected Ken Shamrock, and you put him up against Vince in a sort of boss versus employee sort of situation. You've still got a legitimate badass.
Yeah, I mean, the character they gave him was that, is that he would be calm, cool, and collected. He was a serious athlete. He was a legitimate badass, and then he'd lose his mind. And so imagine like that day after WrestleMania scenario, but it's Ken Shamrock and not McMahon, and it's not, you don't represent the company. It's like, okay, I'm gonna need you to do this, and Ken Shamrock just loses his mind and he ankle locks Vince. All right. Yeah. So back to SummerSlam, I was there, not there, but I was watching when Owen Hart hit the pile driver on Austin. It's ugly, man. Like, you don't necessarily see the impact because his head's between his thighs and whatnot. But like, you can see Owen Hart trying to like vamp when as Steve Austin's paralyzed on the mat. And then in one of those moments where they're still trying to protect Austin, they're still trying to sell him as a badass, you get quite literally the worst roll up I've ever seen in the history of wrestling. It's one of those where, like, if you're wrestling with your toddler, and you bump for him.
I don't bump for my kids. I don't bump for my kids. They got to learn. And I know sell to them like a Young Bucks match.
Just super kicking toddlers all over the house.
Yeah.
Babies.
I use the little one as a weapon against the big one, and if they hit me with something, I pop back up. Fine.
Gotcha. You nip up, huh? Yeah. He rolled up all if you go back and look at the footage, he rolls up Owen, and Owen's like, turtle, oh no, I can't possibly get out of this.
I still don't know how Austin was able to do that. I really,
I don't know.
Like,
well,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, like, watching it back, I think that it's, I mean, Owen basically ragdolls him into the position. Admittedly, I think there's not a lot of it is Steve at this point, but I mean, I'm surprised that didn't exacerbate the injury. It maybe did. Just the fact that he had to move afterwards.
And I don't want to say this because I love Owen Hart, and it breaks my heart what's going to happen to him in the next year or so. But they didn't stop the match. They didn't stop the pay-per-view after they murdered a guy in the, unfortunately, in a terrible accident. They're not stopping for this. But by all rights, they absolutely should have called the match then. Like, once Austin's like, I can't feel anything, the ref should have been like, and we're done. That's it. But it was a different time, and it was like, all right, well, as long as you're breathing, you can, we'll still go with the finish of the match. It's like, he's paralyzed. Maybe get him on a board and out of there. But no, all badass as he was, they drags his carcass to the back so everyone can see him go. And then, Austin has talked about this. Like, well, I think my career's done. And Vince McMahon's like, let's hold the phone on that. Let's have you come out on Raw every week. Yeah. We'll have you come out on Raw every weekend with your broken neck, stun people.
But nothing helps a broken neck like a bump to your lower spine.
What I understand you got a stinger and and your neck's messed up, but what if you just jump on your ass once a week for the next 6 weeks. How do you feel about that?
Yeah.
Anyway,
There you go, Steve.
so that's SummerSlam. In the main event, Sean's your ref. Sean and Bret can't get along. Sean goes to kick Bret. He misses. He hits the Undertaker. Bret wins, which is nice and all. And I'll never quite understand the WWE's incessant need to cut off its nose to spite its face. But they put the title on Bret, and then he's in a feud with the Patriot, which is fine, but it's secondary to Shawn versus the Undertaker at the next pay-per-view.
Yeah, the Patriot.
Which, don't get me wrong, Ground Zero is a great match. Like their first Ground Zero match is awesome. That ends with them being, trying to murder each other and the entire locker room separating them and dragging them out, screaming at one another. That's the one with the infamous shot of the Undertaker yeeting over the top rope into the cameraman.
Yeah. Years before it was was it Sim Snuka that he landed on following, I think, WrestleMania 23 or 24. He landed on one of the Snuka kids. He later went on to be Juice and or Domino. This was the first Undertaker cameraman bump.
I have a distinct memory of that Ground Zero pay-per-view of just the Undertaker and Shawn and how great that match was. And then there's poor Bret, like, I'm over here wrestling the Patriot. I think nobody cares. Poor Del Wilkes, poor Bret.
It's still like the Patriot was so outdated by this point as well. Like, it really didn't belong in what was forming the Attitude Era, really. I know we're not into it in earnest still at this stage, but I just feel that there were so many better opportunities for Bret at this point.
It was a nice idea, and with some better writing and some more focus on it. I mean, clearly the focus was on Shawn and the Undertaker at this point, and not really on Bret. But that's what I mean when I say, like, they put the title on Bret, but they might as well have thrown it in the trash. Like, they just, nobody cared. Like, the big story here is Shawn and the Undertaker at the end of '97. So that takes us to Bad Blood, which is the first ever. This is monumental for this era. That's why we need to talk about it. This is the first ever Hell in a Cell match. This is the first appearance of Kane. That is all this show is good for. There's a lot of one-match shows during this era.
Yeah, very, very much. I think that if in late 1997 you look at Bad Blood and you sort of tell someone at that point the importance of Kane debuting, I don't think they would believe you in a million years.
Kane was in that long. When you first see Kane, he's in that long line of like Giant Gonzalez and and all these monsters that they put with the Undertaker. He too, and as I said about the Undertaker, they both start out as attractions. They start out as basically implements of an angle, and then become characters over time, beloved characters at that.
Yeah. I mean, it's still one of the more famous commentary calls as well. When Kane's coming out, because obviously they teased him for weeks at this point. With Paul Bearer telling the Undertaker of what was to come and all that sort of stuff. And I don't think anyone really saw it, like you say. It was very much Underfaker / Giant Gonzalez / token big man. To face off against Taker.
And what a debut. Like, he comes in and like rips the door off. Like, this thing, the Undertaker Shawn Michaels feud is so bad, it's so violent, they need this extra big cage in order to keep it all under control. And here comes Kane and he rips the door right off. It's like, well.
Yeah. But I mean, like, Kane was he was scary at the time. I'm not saying that like adults or anything were sitting, wetting themselves at the sight of him or anything, but the lights down, the music, the presence of the guy was pretty unique at the time. I think, especially,
the red lighting.
I mean that was huge at the time, and I just remember thinking that, this guy was really impressive. It's a shame that he's going to be wasted, admittedly. I knew that he was still around by the time that, WrestleMania 15 rolls around and everything. But again, sort of looking back to him debuting, and I think that we would look at it in the same way now if, just another big guy.
Well, look at the comparison to like the Fiend. They debut the Fiend against Seth Rollins, and it was against Finn Balor. And they do very similar thing. They dim the lights and there's smoke and it's eerie. Like, I remember Pat and Robert Winfrey and a whole bunch of people like, oh my god, best intro to a character ever with the Fiend. It was very Kane-esque.
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
handled both characters about the same. So
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to how Kane was handled within 5 months of his debut in a moment. But yeah.
So that's Bad Blood, and that gets us to the infamous Survivor Series. I want to get to WrestleMania 14. It's why we're all here. But it does need to be discussed. But before we do, this is the return match of Steve Austin versus Owen Hart. His neck is in good enough shape that he can get back in the ring again. And so he gets Owen Hart gets his comeuppance. Steve Austin beats him in less than 5 minutes. Oy. And we're off to the races with. At this point, it's we're headed to WrestleMania with Austin. We know that we've got at least our the guy that's going to take us into the next generation here. So he's pretty much solid. We're starting to build all the people that are going to participate in WrestleMania 14. So this is the gang rule show, if you'll remember. This is everyone's in a faction, but all anyone talks about is the stupid Montreal Screw Job. It's been talked to death. There was a dark side of the ring on it. Sean's talked it to death. Bret Hart's talked it to death. Jim Cornette's talked it to death.
Scott, we should controversially pretend it doesn't happen. just skip it. Next paper.
There was a minor incident. Move on.
They're quite the angle at the end of Survivor Series, which led us into the final pay-per-view of 1997.
Look, we all know what happened. They got into a locker room fight earlier than that, and Sean, Bret allegedly trying to mend fences with Sean, says, "Hey, I just want to know I'll never hurt you in the ring." And Sean says, "The first chance I get, I'm gonna hurt you," or something to that effect. Like, I'm always willing to put you over, Sean. And Sean said, "I know you are. I will never do the same for you." And then proceeded to walk off with his peacock plumes just waving in the breeze. And Bret's like, "WTF, man?" At which point Bret's like, "Yeah, I'm never dropping the title to him. This is ridiculous. Like, we are in an environment where we are supposed to work with each other, and this asshole can't even do the professional thing and lose when he's supposed to." And Sean's like, "No, I'm not gonna. I'm gonna have a sandwich." And then Vince is like, "I mean, he has a point. He's gonna have a sandwich, Bret." And Bret's like, "I can't live here anymore." So Bret's gonna go to WCW for a ridiculous amount of money and be utterly wasted. But before he does, they got to take the title off of him, which is what they intended to do anyway. I mean, I think it was always going to be Sean and Austin. They just needed to get there. But Bret's like, "No, he told me he won't lose to me, so I'm not going to lose to him." And they fight and they fight and they fight and they argue and they argue and they argue, and there's hemming and hawing, and finally, whoever was that suggested it, whether it was. Like, at this point, everyone's taking credit for the Montreal Screw Job. It was me. I did it. It was my idea. Okay.
It was me, Austin. It was me all along.
Yeah. So for the sake of argument, we'll just say it was Jim Cornette, since he's the one that's most recently said it was my idea. Where he's like, "Look, just fuck him in the ring," and so they do. I watched it live. I watched it with my friends, and wrestling is at its best when it convinces you something real is happening. I talked about, like, with the Austin Owen thing, where, like, he rolls him up, and I'm like, that's the fakest thing. I mean, I know why it's happening, and I sympathize, but it's the fakest looking thing ever, to the point where it took me out of the match. It took me out of the whole show, really. I'm like, come on, guys. Like, this is awful. This was the exact opposite. Like, I legit, like, even before the Screw Job, I legit thought those two guys were going to kill each other. I bought the psychology of that match, hook, line, and sinker. Like, I remember I wrote about it the next day on whatever blog I was writing for, and I was like, I legitimately thought they weren't working anymore. That's how good that match is.
Yeah. I mean, as again, we'll say that sort of one match show. I actually think that's unfair on this event. I think it's a pretty good top to bottom card for this Survivor Series. In fairness, but it's only ever going to be remembered and talked about for this, and there's nothing that either of us are going to be able to add to it at this juncture, really, that hasn't been said a million times. But it is intense, and even watching it now, and even even questioning it as the biggest work in wrestling history.
Oh,
Like,
there's
even if
still
you go
people.
watch it
There's
with,
still people who say it's
you
a
know,
work. To this day, there's the
yeah,
wrestlers
yeah,
and fans that still think that secretly Brett knew this was all along. But like the argument is Brett knew, but Brett has to act like he doesn't know, so that when Brett goes to WCW, he's the hottest guy there, and
yeah.
he leaves them on a hot angle where he basically creates the McMahon character, and it's like. That's a lot of people keeping some pretty big secrets.
Yeah, I mean that I don't think it's a work. I
Mhm.
don't for a second. But if you watch that match from the mindset that it is, it's
Mhm.
still one of the most intense, real feeling wrestling matches in history.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah,
And
no, for sure.
you know, even watching it with that mindset of this is fake, they know how it's ending. Brett's in on it.
Mhm.
It's still phenomenal. I think it speaks volumes to how good at their craft these two guys were and how good they were together.
You know, compare Survivor Series 97 to WrestleMania 12. It's just two completely different matches, and I'm going to go ahead and say that while I know a lot of the work rate snobs love WrestleMania 12, they love Shawn versus Brett. Most people do. Some are like it's too long and it's a lot of rest holds.
It's pretty long.
It's a bit long.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that probably my favorite Shawn Brett match is Survivor Series 97, and not because of the screw job. That's sort of a taking a shit on someone's filet mignon. It's just such a good match. It really is. But it is what it is. It ends how it ends. It did what it did. When you think about what makes the Attitude Era, why do we get the next 3 years that we're talking about tonight? A lot of it is because of that Montreal Screw Job. For better or for worse, work or shoot, you take that away, you take Austin away, maybe the WWF doesn't win the Monday Night Wars. They are, that's why we're spending such a long time on this particular part, because you have to understand you don't get 98, 99, and 2000 without everything that happens in 97. It is probably the most monumental year in the WWF's history since like 85, 86 in terms of like how it really affected the company and launched it forward, because everyone thinks like, oh, like Austin wins WrestleMania 14 and suddenly the company is $1 billion company. Like, no. There's a whole history of things that had to happen for WrestleMania 14 to be what it was. So let's get there. The next pay-per-view is DX. This is a who gives a shit, other than the opening package, which became the DX opening theme, made me laugh so hard I like shot beer out of my nose. I mean,
I'm actually really looking forward to talking about the DX band in a couple of minutes. Really looking forward to talking about the DX band.
You have to understand, this is still yes, they've been toying around with some naughty themes, and you have guys shoving salamis in their pants and whatnot, but we're still kind of a kid company. We're still kind of family entertainment. And then it's like, and our next pay-per-view, strippers and in your face.
Yeah, I think it's that around that kind of time. There's like the Christmas thongs as well, and the late '97 was the DX Christmas thongs. I mean, it was juvenile. I mean, I was like 16 when I saw that first. I thought it was funny. Like, it was the rise of South Park and the Attitude Era.
Right.
Like, these things were they were stupid. You knew they were stupid, but also, I'm nearly 40 now, and I'm still laughing at a salami down the pants. I'm not going to lie to
you. Yeah, I have Shawn Michaels jumping up in Jim Ross's face with his crotch just blown.
Right in the nose. The windscreen wipers on the visor, very right. very current as well with the COVID. Get the face covering on, get the wipers going.
Nice.
Keep that spit out your face. Yeah.
It's like I said, like the WWE always did good pay-per-view package, but the DX one was really in a league of its own. Just, again, it's like, it's always we're coming, and it's a terrible fight, and it's so dramatic, and on our next show, sex. It's like, yikes.
Yeah. Goodness. Yeah. Mr. McMahon, please.
Yup. And your main event is good old Ken Shamrock. What might have been Ken Shamrock versus Shawn Michaels. A perfectly fine match. This leads to now we're into the big push. This is Royal Rumble 98. I want to show this one to my son because I believe this is the infamous one where you have the three faces of Foley.
It is, the three faces of Foley 98. And I mean, that was joyous, really. Like, it really is. And I'm not even a massive Mick Foley fan at this point. I respect the guy, I like the guy and all, but I never really bought him the title winning stuff that came later.
Oh, really? Oh, I was happy for him, but we'll get there.
Like, happy for him as a person, But we digress, or progress needlessly.
So 98 Royal Rumble, there's two things that happen here of importance. One, you have Austin who wins the Rumble, and now it's, bullet train to WrestleMania. He wins it by eliminating The Rock. The other fun thing that happens is, again, the three faces of Foley, which, Foley is less a wrestler now and more a beloved character. And this is kind of the beginning of all of that. It really had been throughout the fall too, with his, the Cactus Jack bit with Triple H and all of that. But I mean, I think between the Cactus Jack dude love personas, this is where, and then what's going to happen in June of 98. This is really the solidifying of Mick Foley as this permanently beloved character that they can always get this trusted hand that they can go to. And one of the more entertaining guys on the roster, even if his wrestling was shit. He was always as a character entertaining.
Absolutely. Very, very, very sports entertaining.
And speaking of breaking one's neck, this is the pay-per-view where Shawn Michaels breaks his back. To this day, Robert Winfrey likes to make fun of me for being squeamish, and there are certain things I can tolerate. I'll tell you what, not for nothing. And Shawn Michaels landing on that casket the way he does, every time they show it, I'm like, that hurts me. That is a bad bump, man. And I don't, in another universe, I don't know how else he takes it without cracking his back. I mean, I guess he lands full on the casket instead of, just the edge of it. But he nails himself, but good. And when we get to the main event of WrestleMania, it shows like he's in a lot. He messed himself up good. I'm not surprised he took years off after this. That's a bad bump.
It is. It's revolting. And I mean, I actually was watching. I was watching AEW Dynamite from last night, and it was, for future reference on listening to this, it's the Sammy Guevara Cody Rhodes ladder match, and there's a bump in that reminded me straight away of Shawn landing on the casket, and it's just he lands too high on his shoulders on Cody in the ladder, and the ladder's elevated pretty high as well, and he just hits and flips forward. And quite honestly, I think if Cody hadn't been there, Sammy's breaking his back. It's like a mirror image bump. And watching it with that, I mean, I winced when I saw that this morning. And it's, for me, it's horrifying to see something like that. You don't learn to fall off a 20-foot ladder, as famously said in the opening to the pay-per-views from pretty much this point onward. But you don't learn to land on a casket.
I watched that last night. It's in the archive now. We did an alternative commentary, like a live reaction to the whole Beach Break show.
Yeah,
and both of us, like, his spot. I thought you were actually going to say the one where he lands on the bottom of the ladder on his torso, because I honestly thought he really injured himself. That was awful.
Yeah.
This poor bastard. He almost died wrestling. Oh no, it was Matt Hardy almost died wrestling Sammy Guevara, where he got dumped on his head. Anyway, the next is this was a stop on the way to WrestleMania, but it's a who gives a crap card. This is
basically 1998's Roadblock, wasn't it?
This was No Way Out of Texas. Is what this was. But
it just kind of makes me laugh, really. No Way Out of Texas.
Yeah. This was supposed to have Shawn Michaels in it, but his back is tiny pieces of chalk at this point. So it's Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, who's Chainsaw Charlie, Owen Hart, and Steve Austin versus the New Age Outlaws, Savio Vega sitting in for Shawn Michaels and Triple H. And wouldn't you know, the good guys won. Who cares? So here we are, finally, WrestleMania 14, which is going to be X-rated. Stupid.
Yeah, it's very, very yeah, such a stupid tagline. Really, like X-rated means one thing at that point. I mean, what this is the same era as like the Pam and Tommy tape and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Like you're
Yeah.
not getting cheap buys for a
I
wrestling
honestly
pay-per-view like
I
this.
honestly think
You
because
know.
they were working on the marketing for WrestleMania 14, somebody had to pitch, why don't we just call this one tits and ass? And they were like, you can't be that obvious about it. What if it's just TNA? Years later.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Prophetic, isn't it?
yeah. So anyway, WrestleMania 14, they get Tyson. You know, the one lead into all of this is the episode of Tyson where Austin and him get in a shoving match. Tyson joins DX, and now he's going to be the special enforcer, like, you know, a la Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
So here's the card, as it were. We have the tag team battle royal, which reintroduces the Road Warriors in their futuristic outfits, joined by Sunny, who at this point had been managing her 87th tag team. Anything about the battle royal? What was your reaction to the Road Warriors coming out in their stupid outfits?
So I like the Road Warriors, and there's a part of me that likes Sonny.
Yeah, sure.
Even now, I
It's a part
guess.
of all of us below the waist.
I think if I'm yeah, I mean, I think even now, I mean, I think I'm a big believer in the crazier she gets, the more attainable she becomes. For the average Joe.
Sure.
But anyway, yeah. But yeah, I think this was exactly what I wanted it to be. We get similar matches, certainly at WrestleMania 2000, in terms of just a cluster F of a match. Highlight probably is one of the Legion of Doom, or one of the Road Warriors rather. I can't remember. I think it was Animal at this point, picking up a non-gimmicked fire extinguisher.
Okay.
So yeah, that was pretty good. Just floods the ringside and an actual
I,
fire extinguisher. Yeah.
I was there live for this. I was in Boston when this happens. We're still, by the way, since we're still digging out of, you know, the post rock and wrestling era, and you know, we're still having to do basketball and hockey arenas for WrestleMania. This one takes place at the place where the Boston Celtics play, and it was the Fleet Center at the time. So I was there in Boston. I marked out pretty hard when they played the Legion of Doom's music, because how do you not? That music is like half their gimmick. But then I saw the outfits and I saw Sunny and I was like, whatevs. You know, and then it was Battle Royal after that. And hey, they won. Wow. All right, next you have Taka Michinoku versus Aguila when they were trying desperately to compete with WCW's pretty awesome cruiserweight division. If you got something, go for it. If not, I'm moving on.
Taka's yeah, it's definitely a match that happened. Taka's one of my favorite wrestlers purely for the bumps he takes in the 2000 Royal Rumble. But anyway, this is definitely a match that was on the WrestleMania 14 card.
They
Back to you,
tried,
Mark.
man, with that light heavyweight division. They gave it their best shot. They didn't seem to. Just a real quick thing on that. The WWF's at the time, WWE's light heavyweight division was a really great example of sometimes the WWE doing something because they know it's popular, they know it's succeeding elsewhere, but not knowing why it's succeeding, and then failing hard at doing it themselves because they don't know why this works. Like WCW's cruiserweight thing, you can't just be like, all right, we're gonna put midgets in the ring now. It's fine. Let's get let's get some really small guys from Mexico and Japan and throw them in there, put masks on them.
The thing is, like, Taka's such a legit performer, even at that stage. I mean, he's such a massive name in Japanese wrestling, even in the late 90s. That I feel like, it should have been taken maybe a little bit more seriously. But these were, I mean, these guys weren't as little as they would have looked if they'd been introduced 5 years prior or 6 years prior. You know, these weren't like, you know, vanilla midgets so much anymore. But yeah, I just think that there was too much going on otherwise. And I think that people weren't tuning into the WWF at this point really for
Right.
a technical masterclass. Because I mean, the thing is that you take this out of context, it's a very good match. You know, it's
Yeah.
they're two very capable guys putting on an entertaining match
Well, that was
for
the
the
thing with
time that they had.
WCW's cruiserweight division. They didn't know how popular it was going to be or how popular it even was. They just did it. We're doing this. We're going to have an international flavor for this show. We have at one point it was like we have 3 hours to kill. We have time. So let's get a couple of cruiserweights out there. Let's do people from wrestling around the world. And if if it's a dead segment, it's a dead segment, but who cares? And then the WWE and then it takes off because people like it. And then the WWE's like, we'll just do that. It's like, no. You have to put time and effort into this. You have to, bring people along. It's not going to be instantly popular. And that's the other thing is like, if things don't take off right, like WWE, like their management style sometimes is like a child with ADHD. They're just like, if it doesn't immediately work, they just get rid of it. Like move on to the next thing. It's really a shame because you're right. Michinoku was an excellent, excellent worker. So Triple H with China versus Owen Hart. And this is like for the European title. And this is the big culmination of everything that had happened with, it was almost like stand-ins at this point. It's like, well, we don't have Shawn and Brett anymore, but we do have Triple H and Owen, so same difference. They were trying to make Owen Hart a thing here. They had held on to him after Montreal, and it was like, we'll put you in a big match, and then you'll get pinned by Triple H. So I feel like I'm going to say a lot over the next couple of shows, and then you got pinned by Triple H. It's the support group of like Goldberg and Booker T and Owen Hart is all sitting around going, Triple H.
No, them feels, man. No them feels.
Yeah. Scott Steiner's trying to figure out the math of it all. It's all, it's all terrible.
He's fat.
Mark Marrow and Sable defeat Goldust doing sort of a BDSM gimmick and Luna Vachon. This was all about them, it's kind of like the joke about Jennifer Lopez. She can't dance like what she used to. She has a bunch of guys dancing around her to make it look like she's moving. That's pretty much what everyone did for Sable here.
Yeah. Sable is a very much a product of a Vince crush, I'm convinced, because
There's no convincing. They've openly talked about that.
Well, yeah, but what I mean is over the next 2 years, we're going to very openly see that she has little to no talent. The Sable bomb is very visibly someone doing a standing somersault in front of her. I feel like she may, and I'm going to just say this, I feel like she may be one of the least talented female workers in the WWE history. Genuinely do. I think she's dreadful. I mean, she's hot, but she's dreadful.
I liked when she shook her waist.
Yeah.
I'm a guy. I like women.
Yeah.
I'm not apologizing for that.
Her career had highlights. Let's agree with that. Like, let's agree with that.
I was not looking.
None of them were in a wrestling match.
I was not looking for Sable to be Becky Lynch. I was looking for Sable to be exactly who she was.
Yeah.
So then we have The Rock versus Ken Shamrock. They had a really great feud, these two. I mean, I don't love The Rock, especially I don't love The Rock the way the rest of the universe seems to. And I always thought his wrestling was average, that he got by on having a Hulk Hogan level charisma.
Yeah.
And he was certainly athletic. I mean, he could do the moves and he could get up and move around the ring. And he was never boring to watch. He was kind of creator wrestler. He was very generic. The stupid things he'll do later, like the people's elbow and stuff like that, gave it a little bit more color. But in terms of like watching a guy actually wrestle in the ring, he was as generic goes. But I have to say, he worked really well with Ken Shamrock. Like Ken Shamrock and him, for whatever reason, in terms of just pure workers, really put together some magic for that era.
I think it's a great program. I really do. I think I don't think they have a bad match. I certainly don't think it was on a major pay-per-view. If they do, I mean, I like both guys at the time. I like them now. I just think it's a good. I think it's a good fun kind of. It's a bit of a cluster of a match. Let's be honest. But we do have teases of what's to come with The Rock's character. Like there's a promo throughout the show where he says that they're asking him, about who's the leader of the nation, and is it him, is it Farouk, like who there's tension within the group. He says that leader's not, it's not a word enough for him. Like he would prefer ruler, and it's just little things like that starting to sneak into his promo work, where you just start seeing that you alluded to. The guy's charisma is, you know, Hulk Hogan levels. You know, his charisma's at 100. Everything else is probably at like a 70. You know, like, but when that tears itself out, you know, the guy's still one of the most over talents in history.
When you
and I
look
think
like
we're really
Daniel,
seeing.
when you look like Daniel Bryan,
Sorry,
you know, or Finn Balor, your work has to be above average. You have to be one of the best workers, I think, in order to get people to pay attention to you. When you look like The Rock, your work doesn't have to be nearly as good.
No.
When you have that level of charisma, and more to the point, when you have characters that shine as brightly as Steve Austin and The Rock, none of the work has to be that good, because people aren't coming for the work; they're coming for the characters, and that was always Vince Russo's thing. It's just that you had to have everything working, not just the characters, because if the wrestling is shit, people will eventually catch on.
Yeah.
But a big part of the rest of WWF's reemergence and success in this era is the fact that you have great, fully formed 3D characters that people can buy into, and their work wasn't bad. It was better than average in most cases.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of which, Cactus Jack and Terry Funk as Chainsaw Charlie take on the New Age Outlaws in a hardcore match. Basically, they called it a dumpster match. It was essentially a casket match for all intents and purposes. And this, it's fun. This was I watching it back. I actually remember watching it in the Fleet Center and having a lot of fun. You know, just having a lot of fun with this one. You know, you can't go wrong with a WrestleMania Mick Foley match. He will usually do something stupid to entertain people.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that the New Age Outlaws, they were just now coming into they were approaching their big push, really, weren't they?
Yeah.
In terms of what was about to happen with them. So they were hot at the time. Cactus Jack, Terry Funk, like legends, you know, in terms of the hardcore scene, in terms of working around the world. So the smart fans were invested in this. The casual fans were invested in the charisma of the Outlaws, and I think it made for a match that appears a lot better than it was. Really, like, I think that the crowd has a lot of the crowd helps a lot in this match. I think it really sells everything that they did. Watching it back again,
I would tell you,
like, the crowd were eating it up, I think.
The thing everyone remembers WrestleMania 14 is Austin wins the title, as if the rest of the show doesn't happen. But just kind of going through it and rewatching it, this was a solid show, and it's maybe the first solid show in a long time, in a lot of years. Because having gone through these with Pat, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's a lot of filler on those shows. This feels very lean. Like, these were the best stars in angles we were pushing, in matches that were good. I mean, for the most part, even like we were talking about, like with Sable, like, she's in a hot angle at that point. You can't get it, you know, the wrestling itself may have been on the bottom tier, but
it's not a necessarily a bad match either. I mean, it's probably, for my money, the worst thing on the show, but it's also more gimmick than match as well. So I think it's also hard to put it alongside. Probably say the main event. It's hard to put those two matches side by side and compare them. You know, it's apples and oranges. One thing was fine for what it was, and the other thing was great for what it was. And it was watchable. You know, Goldust's attire aside, there's certainly nothing that happens in that on this show that I don't feel fits in and adds to another show elsewhere.
Yeah, WrestleMania top to bottom is solid. It is a solid show, and it's probably the first one that feels like a WrestleMania since WrestleMania 7, maybe.
You used the word lean, and I think that's a perfect word for it, because I think it's like eight matches, I think, on the card, and that's not lots, really, you know, for, you know, a 2.5 to 3 hour show.
Yeah, wait till we get to WrestleMania 2000 with his 50 matches.
Yeah. Better start talking about that now, aren't we?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the lean is perfect because it is the hot angles, the hot guys, with probably again the exception maybe of the light heavyweight match, but
Mhm.
they put in a good effort on the show, and it
Yeah.
certainly wasn't the worst thing on it either. So
So the main event, and this is why I kind of summed up the show now, because what is there to talk about? Sean's in so much goddamn pain, it's hard to watch. It's like I feel legit like you hear about Sean in this era and what a prick he was, and how hard he was to work with, and how the whole Montreal Screw Job doesn't really need to happen if everyone acts like an adult, starting with Sean, and
yeah.
Sean's
Oh, we've
addicted to
forgotten
pills. Oh
Undertaker
shit!
Kane was, yeah.
Yeah,
Although
go ahead.
one thing I meant to mention, I said about the DX band.
Hmm.
If anyone listening can get onto YouTube and find the actual the performance of America the Beautiful, I think it is that they do
Hmm.
before the before the show. Yeah, you'll thank me. You th-
There's a reason we're not talking about the celebrities on this show.
Yeah, but that's it. Yeah, very rightly, probably the last time we see the DX band in a live performance. But yeah, anyway, Kane Undertaker. I mentioned as well about Kane and Undertaker, or sorry, Kane rather. Within a few months of him debuting, kind of being treated a little bit unfairly, really, and I think that's summed up by the nonsense before what should have been such a hot angle going
Mhm.
into this of Kane versus Undertaker finally going 1-1 at WrestleMania, and they suck the wind out of it with the Pete Rose stuff beforehand.
Yeah, though the Pete Rose stuff made me laugh. I
I
have
mean,
to admit that
it is funny, yeah, it is
yeah,
funny, but what should have been probably the biggest blood feud on the card.
right. Probably didn't need a comedy bit set up.
It didn't need a comedy gimmick setting it up. Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
right. But
So back, yeah, Undertaker Kane was one of the highlights of the match, and this again, you ask Pat, the Undertaker's not his favorite technical wrestler. And yeah, and Undertaker's definitely been in some dogs here, but him and Glenn Jacobs always work well together, and they will
yeah,
continue to work well together for years and years to come.
yeah,
As much of a jerk as Shawn Michaels is, it is hard to watch this match, and even though it's sort of a footnote now in the history of wrestling, all anyone cares about here is this is the beginning of the Austin era. Austin's
yeah,
about to put the company on his back and take off into the stratosphere. We all know that, but you can't. There's talk that Shawn going into it was just in a really bad, like, negative psychological space, and he didn't really want to put Austin over, and he's just being a giant baby about it. And the Undertaker was like threatening to kill him backstage if he didn't cooperate, and things like that. And he goes out
where
and
was he in November?
he
where was that attitude in November?
was in
Anyway,
catering, going, "What the hell's going on out there?" But credit where credit's due, and I'm not the world's biggest Shawn Michaels fan, but I'm also a pretty fair guy. He tried in that match. As bad as as bad off as his back was, he did everything he could, and it's hard to watch. It's not Austin's best effort either. Everyone like puts it on Shawn, like, well, Shawn was crippled. Yeah, but it's not like Steve Austin looked great in that match either. It was a
yeah,
lot of sizzle, not a lot of steak. And at the end, all anyone cared about was they put the belt on the right guy for
yeah.
like the first time in years.
I think it shows how I mean, obviously these guys are two of the best
Mm-hmm.
workers of all time. Realistically, they've got to be in the conversation on the sort of Mount Rushmore. But I think that you mentioned like the sizzle and stuff. It's a big example of how when smoke and mirrors is done well, you
Mm-hmm.
can distract from the shortcomings of a performer. Because Austin, he's back a few months from his injury.
Mm-hmm.
Sean is obviously in pain, like he's visibly hurting through the match, but there's enough going on otherwise. They kind of color it
Yeah.
in around the performers enough for you to be taken away from looking at it.
Yep.
And I think it's a prime example of how to do that well, and I think it's a prime example of how to do a big WrestleMania ending well,
Yeah.
because it was like legitimately newsworthy. It would end up on like ESPN and things the following days that Mike Tyson was
Sure.
involved physically, and it gets people
Mm-hmm.
who maybe haven't watched wrestling for a long time. Mike Tyson at this point was you know, he was the baddest man on the planet. You know, and
Yeah.
him being involved and hitting Michaels gave him legitimate opportunity to go away, rehab his back, become commissioner, whatever he decided to do afterwards, and cement Stone Cold as the champion and the guy from here on out.
So that's WrestleMania 14. And before we continue, I just want to remind everybody that one of our great sponsors here is Grammarly. Grammarly's AI-powered products help people communicate more effectively. Grammarly helps you write mistake-free on Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and nearly anywhere else you write on the web. Grammarly corrects hundreds of grammar, punctuation, spelling mistakes while also catching contextual errors, improving your vocabulary, and suggesting style improvements. To download Grammarly today, go to getgrammarly.com/W2M Network. Again, that's getgrammarly.com/W2M Network to download Grammarly for free. The Austin era has begun. Stone Cold. And so over the next month, we get really the feud that takes us through the next year. And it's the best way they could have done it, because you needed kind of an untouchable Dark Lord. You know, you needed an emperor, and then the emperor needed hands to take on your hero. And that's the story of the next year, told in chapters. Chapter 1 is Dude Love. Chapter 2, I think, is like The Undertaker. Chapter 3, where, you know, is The Rock. And then chapter 4, our Ragin Climax. It's The Rock versus Austin, reclaiming his title. That's the story of the next year. So we start off with Unforgiven, where the two big matches here were Dude Love and Steve Austin, which ends in DQ, and then The Undertaker and Kane in an Inferno match. I just stupid Inferno match. Yeah. I was there for that live. No, I'm sorry. I was there in Albany the night after WrestleMania, but the Inferno match was freaking hilarious to me. What did you think of that?
Yeah, it's definitely something that happened. Inferno matches are ridiculous. I mean, I think that the whole point with a lot of wrestling is that we know it's not real. We know it's not actually happening. We know that these guys aren't really going to go on fire, even if they do. However, there's a line of comfort that I have with wrestling, and I don't want to see someone legitimately put on fire. I don't. You know, it's the same reason I don't watch more extreme promotions. I don't want to see someone actively stabbed during a wrestling match. I think it's pretty stupid. So watching this in a WWF pay-per-view, you know, you've got you know, two of the big names at this stage going to set each other on fire. No, they're not. They're not. And if they are, it's going to be very, very gimmicked, and it's going to be very obvious. And it was.
What was it like? He had his arm like caked in that like blue flame stuff or whatever.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, for those not watching and just listening to this, I'm just shaking my head and shrugging my shoulders.
Yeah, I remember watching it. I was like, how are they going to get away with this? What are they going to do? It was one of those things where the WWE experimented in things that would like look cool, but would ultimately end up being dumb. And it did. It looked awesome. Like the grill grate around the ring with the fire going, that they were smart and they kept it low because, you know, they don't want to set the whole ring on fire. But every time somebody bumped in it, the flames would shoot up, and it legitimately frightened the audience. I remember, because they thought they really thought they were going to set the place on fire. But it looked cool as shit, and they managed to keep it under control. And then you know, there's no way to do this where it looks good, and so it looks dumb. It looks really phony, but whatever. Kane gets burned yet again, and you know, and the story of Kane and the Undertaker moves on. So we go to Over the Edge the following month. And this is the Nation versus DX in a 6-man tag. And your main event is Steve Austin versus Dude Love. This is hilarious. This match. This is the Falls Count Anywhere one with Mr. McMahon's the ref, Pat Patterson's the ring announcer, Gerald Briscoe is the timekeeper, and the Undertaker is the special guest enforcer. Yeah. Oh boy.
This is Russo-rific. This is. I mean, I'll be honest. I can't even remember if he's the primary booker at this stage, but it's just, it is. It's hilarious, and in quite a good way as well. I mean, it really does become a bit much, really. But it also did what it had to. It was, I think, it was the right level of frustrating. You know, you wanted to see everyone involved get their ass kicked at the end of it.
Yep.
For right or wrong. And I suppose for that, it did what it was worth. It did what it was trying to. I mean,
It-
one thing that's sort of happening at this stage, sorry to interject, was
no, go
obviously you
ahead.
mentioned DX in the prior match. Is that at this stage they're properly putting weight on Triple H's shoulders at this stage with the sort of new reformed DX, in this sort of period as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I mean that's kind of bubbling away in the background, is that we're seeing our first real glimpses that there's trust back on Triple H. There's the reliance on him to carry something on with
Well,
Shawn Michaels being
this is
gone.
the early seedlings of both The Rock and the Triple H being in the main event scene. I said
Yeah.
before, the day after WrestleMania, they looked around and they said they have no heels. They have nobody to work with Austin. And so they make do with, with Cactus and the Undertaker and Vince McMahon and all of Vince McMahon's minions. Like, they make hay out of what little they had. But this is a kind of a rebuilding year. 98 to 99 is we need to restack the main event roster. It's one of the few times in the WWE history where, because normally it's like the bottom half is all nuts and stupid, but the top part of it is where all the money is, and you've got loads of people who can work at the top.
Yeah.
This is the exact opposite. We have nobody who can work at the top.
Yeah.
and you have all these guys in the middle. Like, we got to elevate some people. And they start with The Rock and Triple H here. This is the beginning of it. So all you people who hate Triple H, this is the year that you got to focus on, because this is where it starts. King of the Ring, 1998. All anyone ever remembers about this is that Hell in the Cell match, which the very first thing I showed I showed my son wrestling. I showed him the Hell in the Cell, because he's a baby and he has no attention span. And if you want to show a child wrestling, and you want to maintain their attention, show a guy falling off a cage 3 times. They'll love it. He did. And that's what he thinks wrestling is now at 8 years old. That is all that match is. It's the Mick, look, I don't love Ric Flair, and Ric Flair's comments about Mick Foley probably are out of bounds, but I do sympathize with Ric Flair's point of view. This is the Mick Foley stunt show. And also
very much.
Also, short of actually killing the guy, everything that could go wrong with that match does. Like, if you hear them talk about it, like, there are spots that are utterly unplanned because the cage fell apart.
Yeah, you can see it. I mean, I remember watching that match for the first time, and I think that, we mentioned the Shawn casket incident and stuff, but I think this is actually far more uncomfortable viewing, because those are two legitimately big guys up there. That's 600 pounds worth of human, 25 feet in the air, possibly higher. And you just see the cage, and you literally see cable ties popping and buckling, and
because it wasn't meant to be
mesh falling away. And it just, I mean, obviously now it's, later Hell in a Cell matches, it's all visibly reinforced, and it maybe takes it away a little bit. But from a humanist standpoint, like, thank God no one's going to fall through that, because if that second bump had happened not from a choke slam where he was already going onto his back, that's a different outcome right there. Like, if if either of them fall through that cage without it being in the middle of a bump, they're paralyzed. They're breaking their legs, or they're never walking again. Breaking the legs being best case scenario is a scary situation. So I find that extremely uncomfortable. Cool as shit, the bumps. Let's be honest. Like, in terms of highlight reel, phenomenal. As an actual person, no.
We're going to talk about it shortly, but the 1999 Royal Rumble is the one where Mick Foley gets hit in the head with a chair 86 times in a row in front of his wife and kids. And they notoriously on Beyond the Mat, they told the story about how, he went back to Vince McMahon and he was like, "Thank you, but never do that again." That's what you should have told him at the King of the Ring. Please stop trying to murder yourself in my ring, dumbass. Like, I get you're fat and at the end of your career, but this is not the way to get over. Please stop trying to kill yourself. And I think even the Undertaker said something very similar to him, where it was like, listen, you know how Shawn daintily held himself at the edge of the cage, looked where he was going to go, and then yeeted himself in that direction? What if you just threw me, devil may care, off the cage? And the Undertaker's like, why?
It's the first recorded use of the word yeet. or a precursor to that bit in in Lord of the Rings. You're like you're gonna have to chuck me.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember like legitimately the Undertaker saying to him like, "Why do you want to kill yourself in the middle of the ring? It's like it's just not worth it." And it really wasn't. Like, look, as a fan, you watch that, and like I talked about this with the Montreal Screw Job, you're just watching this like mouth agape, like, oh my god. Now it's so commonplace to see these guys jump, off a high precipice into a tall glass of drinking water, observe. But back then, you were watching history happen. You never seen a guy like even the old scaffold matches were all kind of carefully planned. Like you knew someone was going to fall off. That was the point of a scaffold match. You had no idea Mick Foley was going to do what he did in that match. And that is all like the fact that and then Steve Austin and Kane have to follow it. They should have just walked out and shot each other. It was the only thing that would have been able to top what you just had.
If memory serves me right as well, it was at the first blood match, and I think that Kane gets a small nick on his arm about 30 seconds into the match, and they have to cover for it the rest of the time. Right. Like it's significant blood loss. I think they call it. The match can only be stopped by significant blood loss, not a trapped fingernail. Like as Kane's cut on his arm becomes progressively more Sabu-esque throughout the match. And they're like, no, that's not what we mean by first blood.
Well, first blood on your head. That's what we mean.
Yeah. First blood from your skull. Oh, by the way, this guy who wears a mask and has got lots of hair that will know. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that details. This bald guy though, he's going to bleed like a stuck pig. You'll see.
The irony of the first year of Steve Austin's reign is his matches are not great, and this is one of them. Like he is definitely held up by a card of strong workers because his actual matches were not phenomenal. This is not an example of a good Steve Austin match.
No.
Less said about it.
Props to Mick coming back out though. Fair play.
Yeah. No, dude, Mick Foley is a man's man. Like there's elements of him I don't like. Some of his politics and the way that he interacts with people online, I'm not in love with. I think he's kind of condescending. But man's man. I mean, like throw me off a 15-foot high steel cage and see if I come back out.
Yeah, he was gonna. I think he was gonna like weekend at Bernie's his way back out to that ring if he had to. Just like get the Stooges holding him up, just walking him to the.
Yep. All right. So we go into our July pay-per-view. We are at Fully Loaded. And your main event, and we're just building towards The Rock, Steve Austin. No, I'm sorry, Steve Austin versus The Undertaker. But it's a tag team match. You have Steve Austin and The Undertaker defeating Kane and Mankind. And then the co-main was The Rock versus Triple H, and ending in a time limit draw. 2 out of 3 falls for the Intercontinental title. The other big one on here, just because it leads into SummerSlam, is Owen Hart defeating Ken Shamrock in a dungeon match with Dan Severn as special guest referee. Yeah, this one was a great idea on paper, and then you look at it, you're like, is there a reason why we're having Owen Hart wrestle in his dad's basement, which is the ceiling is about at like height level?
I liked it.
Did you really?
Yeah, I don't know why I liked it. I don't know. I mean, considering that Fully Loaded of any year it was running, what did you get? Did we get 3 Fully Loaded? If memory serves me right. This is probably the only match I could name from any of them, except for possibly the Good Housekeeping match. And I think I'd maybe even need to fact check if that was Fully Loaded or not. I think it was Fully Loaded 2000 maybe. Anyway, that I think speaks kind of volumes for the summer of this year, really.
So that's Fully Loaded. Then we get to SummerSlam, which I was at. That was at Madison Square Garden. That was the highway. So this was the first time like they were playing somebody else's song, I think. They had licensed Highway to Hell. I never want to hear that song as long as I live. And I love AC/DC. But hearing that live as many times as we did, I was like, by the end of it, I was like, if I ever hear AC/DC again, it'll be too soon. Steve Austin has gone on record saying this was not a great match with The Undertaker. Like, for whatever reason, they just did not click that night. And then Austin almost knocked himself out. Like, I think he actually legit knocked himself out cold. This is a great SummerSlam, though. This is a lot of fun matches on it. You have Steve Austin versus The Undertaker. You have Triple H and The Rock in the ladder match. I made a joke with my son during the Cody Rhodes, Sammy Guevara match. I'm like, now the important thing you have to remember about ladder matches is someone will suddenly get arthritis in the match, and they won't be able to grab the title until it's time. And I had to explain to my son what arthritis was. But this is the very first example of them not getting their timing down. So you have guys reaching for the title going, I can't reach it. It's like, it's right there. Just you got it.
That's it is a proper issue with ladder matches. I think that the longer that they go, certainly I think it's a struggle. I think that now where we're at, 2022, I think ladder matches are one that really need to be booked carefully to avoid that kind of thing happening. And this is one of the big prime examples of that early. What do we do when we're here? And any normal person at this stage would grab the title and get the hell out of Dodge. And they need to retie their shoes, but at the top of the ladder and stuff. Just no.
So this was so another good one was Ken Shamrock versus Owen Hart in the Lions Den match, which is at the what they now call the Hulu Theater at Madison Square Garden. That was fun. I actually enjoyed that. And like I said, a lot of fun here. We have Gangrel, we have the Oddities, which were fun. You have X-Pac and Jeff Jarrett. Edge is on this show with Mark Marrow. So good show overall. But this was, like I said, chapter 2 of the Austin-McMahon feud. And now we go into the second half of the year here, where we're building up a certain somebody to carry us into the year that follows. And so we have Breakdown, which was the triple threat match where The Undertaker and Kane both pinned Steve Austin. And relevant to topics, we also have The Rock defeating Ken Shamrock and Mankind for the in a triple threat steel cage match to determine the number one contender for the WWF Championship. Keep that in mind, everybody. So
that's going to be important later.
So Kane and The Undertaker pinned Steve Austin. So we're going to do a rematch at Judgment Day, but this time, because McMahon's screwing with Austin, he has to be the special referee, and it's a match contested between Kane and The Undertaker, which ends in a double pinfall, which means there's no champion. And since Austin didn't crown a new champion, he was fired, like you do. So what's The Rock doing on this show? Where's The Rock? Is The Rock here? Where are you, Rock? Ken Shamrock defeated Mankind for the Intercontinental title. Oh, and Mark Henry defeated The Rock in a singles match. Okay, that's what The Rock is doing. Good strong push going into what we're going to do next. So
it's very forgettable, but also very, very random, knowing what's coming.
So now we get to the Deadly Games, which, by the way, I always laugh at the theme of this one, because the WWF is not really known for a lot of its pop and soul up at this point. It's a lot of rock music, maybe a little bit of rap, if that, but it's always been a lot of heavy rock music, especially in this era. And the Deadly Games theme, because it's a deadly game. Like, what the hell is this?
It's a really, really good show. I think a really good show. I really like it. Not so much the theme.
Show itself is,
not so much the
theme.
theme.
I was going to say
the theme is straight out of a cancelled sitcom. Really into it. It's like a spin-off sitcom,
This should have been a theme song to something on the UPN network, right between Homeboys from Outer Space and Sister. What the hell?
A character spin-off of Days of Our Lives.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, Deadly Game. This is the tournament to crown a new WWF champion. At this point, Mick Foley is firmly in the corporation. He is corporate Mankind. They have, put him in a suit and cleaned him up, and this is Mick Foley wrestling in silly outfits. But the Steve Austin's in the tournament, which I think he. I gotta find him here. Steve Austin defeats the Big Boss Man by DQ in the first round. Mankind defeats Steve Austin in the tournament semifinals, and so the final is your baby face that has been rising through the ranks and spending most of the year feuding with Triple H. Your baby face Rock everyone's favorite wrestler at this point, probably the second to Austin in popularity, and he's fighting Mick Foley, your corporate champion, your bad guy, your evil villain for 90% of this year, and they screw Mick Foley.
Yeah.
And because the WWE is collectively, their mentality is so childlike, they not only screw Mick Foley, but they have to do a replay of the Montreal Screw Job because we just can't let it go.
Yeah.
And so Vince McMahon has his chosen person in The Rock. The Rock ends up defeating Mankind, and he's your new champion. And boom, we are off to the build towards WrestleMania with corporate champion The Rock versus the people's champion, the person, the working man's champion, Steve Austin. That's where we're headed. So that's the Survivor Series. It's a long show with the tournament and everything, but still pretty solid. A lot of good matches. The return of the Big Boss Man as the enforcer of the corporation. That was a lot of fun. Let's skip Capital Carnage because who cares? So the next pay-per-view. So we had It's Time when Vader was supposed to be in the main event. It didn't happen. It ended up being Sid. And then we had Degeneration-X. And now we have Rock Bottom because our December pay-per-view must always be named after a wrestler. And this is Steve Austin.
It's a coming out party for The Rock, really, more than anything.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that it's named after him, but that's really all it is. It's a coronation, I think. But I think it works well in the coming months as a big picture event because it really does put that sort of corporate stamp on The Rock and just kind of pushes that kind of arrogance of it all and that kind of chosen one mentality, which plays right into the build to WrestleMania.
Absolutely. So we have Steve Austin defeating The Undertaker in a Buried Alive match for the right to compete in the 1999 Royal Rumble. And we have Mankind defeating The Rock by technical submission for the WWF Championship, but Mankind wasn't awarded it because McMahon screwing with him. But the stated reason is Mankind could only win by submission, which brings us to the infamous Royal Rumble 1999. I know a lot of people hate this Royal Rumble. I was there live. As uncomfortable as the Mick Foley Rock match is to watch on TV, it was more uncomfortable, I think, to be there live. There was actually a lot of confusion when you heard Mick Foley over the PA as he's being pummeled to death by The Rock. I mean, look, The Rock Mick Foley had an outstanding feud. People would love it for years to come. This was not a high point for anyone's career or the WWF history. With handcuffing Mick Foley and The Rock beating him senseless. I mean, it made The Rock look vicious. The Rock could have looked just as vicious with less concussive blows to Mick Foley's freaking head. But the other thing that everyone remembers this for is that Austin McMahon started off the Royal Rumble, proceeded to fight, and then you don't see him again for most of the Royal Rumble. They're just fighting backstage. They're leaving. They're just not there. Ultimately, I believe this is the one McMahon won. If I remember correctly. Yeah, McMahon wins the Royal Rumble by last eliminating Steve Austin. And it was fun to see, look, because Vince McMahon had for the longest time been just the owner of the company and everything. And before that, he was, even though he was the owner, he was seen as an on-screen commentator and whatnot. So to take the next step in the evolution of the McMahon character, to see him physically get in the ring with Austin and then win the Royal Rumble as a one-time thing. Unlike Bischoff, unlike Vince Russo, unlike a lot of people, Vince McMahon knew he was not a wrestler. And so you can do it once and get away with it, but it has to move the story forward. And so Vince McMahon winning the 1999 Royal Rumble, screwing Steve Austin and, putting more hurdles in the way to get to The Rock at WrestleMania was effective storytelling. I know it's not everyone's favorite match. People hate this Royal Rumble for that reason. Not to mention the fact that it's not the world's greatest Royal Rumble either. But in terms of a storytelling device, this was a great part of this ongoing saga. So I talked about The Rock, Mick Foley, and the unfortunate concussion issues with that match. And I talked about the Steve Austin and Vince in the Royal Rumble. So Stu, before we move on to the next part of this, what did you think of those two matches?
So, I mean, watching, Beyond the Mat later on and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable viewing that whole thing with The Rock, and it's.
Mhm.
I think now it's probably a bit of a blemish on The Rock's career
Yeah.
in terms of wrestling. I think the I mean, he's obviously right now the world's highest grossing or highest paid actor or similar. But it's this, if he ever decides to run for president, which he suggested during the WrestleMania vignette where he called himself a ruler, which if he does, by the way, that's some foreshadowing. That's long-term storytelling. But
Mm.
uh, yeah, like it's uncomfortable, and I think that taken out of context, it's not a nice viewing. That time that
No.
The Rock beat the shit of Mick Foley for real. And even watching Beyond the Mat, I don't think he comes across well on that either. I think
No,
that
he comes
what
across as
little you see of
entitled.
him outside, yeah, what you see outside of him, outside the match happening,
Mhm.
and outside the footage from inside the ring, I think there's no sympathy from him, which we know is
Mm.
false. Him and Mick Foley are great friends and became great friends, later down the
Mhm.
line. But yeah, not great.
Turn
But
that around
you
though.
sort of
The Rock doesn't do that for Mick Foley. Let Dwayne Johnson
no.
not volunteering to get a concussion as Mick Foley beats him upside the head. So this is what I hate about the whole Mick Foley Rock thing is that friendship only works because one's pretty and one's ugly, and the ugly one is willing to do anything for the pretty one, to
Yeah,
maintain that friendship, and the pretty one takes the ugly one for granted. It's tale as old as
yeah.
time.
Like mean.
Turn that around, and the
It's like
Rock's the
Mean
ugly
Girls.
one. Yeah. turn that
Yeah.
around. The Rock's not doing any of that shit for Mick Foley.
No, a very good point. I sorry, I had to. I'll apologize for having to jump off. It's the joy of doing these live with young kids in the house, so I apologize for that. But I came in at the tail end of you talking about Vince winning the Rumble, and I mean, you look down a list of names, then that really does stick out like a sore thumb. But at the time, in a sort of bigger picture, I think it's absolutely fine. I think that realistically, you look at anyone other than Austin winning it had to be Vince. There wasn't anyone else realistically. So to put that swerve on it, where Austin didn't win the Rumble and then had something to earn at that, I think certainly for the first time in a long time, there's an important event between the Rumble and between
Mm-hmm.
Mania. I
Yeah,
think we
for
can say
sure.
that about the Valentine's Day Massacre. There's not really any other event, probably even for a long time afterwards, arguably No Way Out the following year. Um, that's not a throwaway. Let's get this out of the way because no one cares until it's WrestleMania.
Yep,
And
for sure.
Vince winning the Royal Rumble was absolutely integral to this overall story.
So the other thing that's happening, and we're almost at 2 hours here, and I don't want this to go too long, but this could have been like a 3-hour podcast just if you just start to talk about what's happening in WCW during all of this.
Yeah.
As the two companies are about to change places in terms of popularity and financial success, 98 to 99 is, in 99 to 2000 is big for the WWE. It's what launches them into a multinational, international, billion-dollar company. You don't have it without these 2 years. Meanwhile, in WCW, things are falling apart.
Yeah.
But the reason I brought that up is up to this point, 96 and 97, it's a lot of guys going over to WCW for the fat paycheck and the less days. You don't get to see too many guys coming over. I mean, you had people who left the company quite naturally, Steve Austin, Mick Foley, Mark Marrow, but you don't get as far as like the Monday Night War Lex Luger level jumps, or Scott Hall or Kevin Nash jumps.
Only X-Pac related stage, I would say.
I was gonna say it's all one-way traffic for a while, but then X-Pac jumps over the night after WrestleMania 14. The next big jump that happens is the Giant, Paul White, now known as the Big Show. And he comes over, his contract ends naturally, and he's like, all right, well, I've done all I can for this company. Let me go over Hulk Hogan famously encouraged him, go, Vince will make you a star and you'll be a billionaire. So he goes. And he shows up here at the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And what would be prophetic for Paul White's WWF career makes an utter ass out of himself. I don't know how
He
much.
he turned allegiance 3 times on the same night. He had 3 babyface turns just during this first event. And walking to the ring, he started sobbing and turned heel. And then by the time he got in the ring, he was face again. Then he forgot, cried, turned babyface. I've already forgotten where I'm going. I've forgotten which alignment I was, even in my own analogy there. Jeez, don't know how the guy does it.
All I remember about Paul White is him coming up through the mat like the Undertaker, throwing Steve Austin at the cage, and the cage going wee as Steve Austin is carried to victory. The look on Steve Austin's face of like, what stupid company do I work for? Wee! And out he goes. And Vince McMahon face just sells the whole thing because it was probably purposeful. It kind of has to be, I would assume. But let's pretend for a moment that they didn't know the cage was going to break like that, because apparently these things are made of straw. And so Paul White doesn't know he doesn't know the cage is about to break when he throws Steve Austin. Steve Austin doesn't know he's hanging on for dear life. And then there's Vince. Why me? Why does this keep happening? Again, I don't know if any of that was real or planned or whatever, but all their faces are just utterly priceless, and that is the only thing memorable about the St. Valentine's Day Massacre for me.
Yeah. I like it as a show name. I know that it's probably got slightly more negative connotations in world history, really, but
Sure.
yeah, it's one of these sort of one-off named events that I think quite like to see that return in some capacity. It never will, because it's not marketable, but
well, it's funny. Like I think they did a Valentine's Day pay-per-view. They did the NXT takeover on Valentine's Day, and it was like the obvious choice was to call it NXT Takeover St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and they went with like Vengeance Day. Just never miss an opportunity to make your company look like shit, people. Anyway. WrestleMania 15. We are finally here again. I told you I was going to shoot right through 98 to 99 because it all leads to this. I was here at this when I was in Philadelphia for this. This is the Ragin Climax. This really did feel like they used to talk about like the WrestleMania feeling like the season finale, and this really did. This was the culmination of a year-long story between Austin and McMahon, and then The Rock and Mick Foley, and like this WrestleMania for the first time in a very long time felt like it was tying up a year's worth of cohesion. You didn't have people leaving, you didn't have people as in WrestleMania's past where everyone on the card had just gotten there 5 minutes beforehand. You had everyone on this card almost had a year-long, with the exception of Paul White, had a year-long build up to get there, a year-long's worth of stories. This WrestleMania 15, while wrestling-wise may not be everyone's favorite, storyline-wise, I think WrestleMania 15 is one of the best they've ever done. It lacks the grandeur of some of the other ones, like 17, because it's not a stadium. Again, it's in a basketball arena rather. But I can't say enough good things about 15. It is, I think, the high watermark before things are really going to blow up after this. It's sort of the culmination of a lot of effort to reclaim the top spot against WCW. That's probably where it stands in history. So, any general thoughts about that before I kind of go through the card?
I love this show. I absolutely love it. I said at the start, and I mean, there's not even a joke in my voice when I say it. I think that WrestleMania 15 is. I said to you before we went on air that there's a bit of garbage about it, but in the best possible way. Like all wrestling to some degree is crap. Really, let's be honest. All wrestling is nonsense, and it's just that sort of nonsense is sometimes exactly what you want. It's sometimes exactly what you need. I feel like this pay-per-view is, I don't know, like a Fast and the Furious of wrestling pay-per-views. Is it a masterpiece? Is it is it got The Undertaker versus Shawn Michaels in a breathtaking match for the ages, one of the greatest matches of all time? No, do you know what? It doesn't have anything that stands out in that capacity.
Right.
Maybe Rock Austin is the takeaway match from the event if you have to watch just one.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, there was meaningful storylines leading into every match. No one was on the card to put them on the card,
Right.
and everything changed on it. We had, like the DX combustion, after it, after them mending fences and then blowing them apart again. And I just think that for a spectacle, this is what I want from my wrestling when I'm watching.
Yeah.
And that's the best compliment that I can pay the show, is that it's just the perfect level of nonsense.
So when Pat and I conceived of doing this podcast series, we decided we were going to end it with 20, because after 20, to your point, they all just kind of feel like another pay-per-view, especially now. WrestleMania doesn't feel special to me anymore. Maybe that's just the old man in me coming out. But I will tell you that, like, after 20, the John Cena era, no offense to the guy, they certainly made a lot of money and he had some perfectly good matches. And I always looked forward to WrestleMania, but this is going to be one of the last few times, with WrestleMania 17 probably being the high water mark of it feeling like it's WrestleMania. This is special. This is not another day at the office. Whereas from 21 and on, they could have named the show anything and it would have been like, it's just another show. We're going to refresh some things. We're going to change some things, but ultimately it's just another cog in the wheel. This giant machine that just keeps on turning. But yeah, WrestleMania 15 is very special, I think. Very standout in that respect.
I think my big my biggest sort of hot take, I'm going to call it a mild take on WrestleMania 15, is that for me personally, I think the big difference between this and 17 is the stadium atmosphere.
For sure.
And that's really the only thing that splits hairs with it for me, is that if you put this show in a stadium, if you put it in front of 60, 70,000 people, I think this is, on Wikipedia, they actually reference 411 Mania on it, and I think that it scores a 5 out of 10. And I know that this is a much maligned event, but I think that this puts it up two notches out of 10 on anyone's score chart. If this is in front of that many people, because wrestling was so hot at the time, so hot.
WrestleMania 15 is important for it being the first WrestleMania where they took the lead back from WCW. WrestleMania 17 is known in history as the WrestleMania that ended the Monday Night War. By then, it's over. But WrestleMania, it's like they bought WCW the week before WrestleMania, famously. Yeah. So, and I think those two shows you have to know for that reason. It's why I link these three shows together. But because WrestleMania 17 really has a standalone, because if you don't talk about the Monday Night Wars in the end of it with WrestleMania 17, you're missing a whole element of that show.
Yeah.
All right. So just kind of whipping through this real quick. Hardcore, just give me the belt and I'll beat everybody. Holly defeats Al Snow and Billy Gunn. So watch wrestling with a child. It really does change your perspective. These three guys walk out, and I have to explain the guy with the mannequin head to my 8-year-old, almost 8-year-old. And I'm like, so he's crazy and hears voices. And the voice he hears, he thinks is coming from the mannequin head. Oh, what's the mannequin head's name? Head. And my son goes, it's a little on the nose, don't you think?
Wow.
Yeah. So
you're right though. You're right though. I mean, I watched that. We've mentioned this Sammy Cody match a couple of times already, but I watched that with my 3-year-old this morning, and there's a suplex spot quite early on in the match where Cody puts basically a standing suplex, super impressive. Really early on in the match, I watched that moment 5 times before I inevitably said, "Listen, we're going to just keep watching," because I kept getting told again. I want to see that again.
Right.
I'm thinking, okay, but it was just, you're right. It's suddenly a different thing, and watching it with a kid of any age, really, it's real to them. Damn it.
So then Billy Gunn walks out, and I'm like, so, little boy, here comes a man who calls himself Mr. Ass, or the Ass Man. He likes to kick him. He likes to kiss him. He likes to stuff him.
Stuff him.
My son,
stick him and pick him.
crying, laughing. Just the. You really get a sense of how juvenile wrestling is when something like that entertains a young boy that much.
Yeah,
like a lot of like.
I was going to say, if he's laughing that much at his name, wait till he sees his King of the Ring push.
Yeah, wait till he sees his King of the Ring fight. So Yeah, so Hardcore Holly beats Al Snow and Billy Gunn, and it's they had upped up the violence here. They were doing a lot of garbage matches during this era. It's fine for what it is. Owen and Jeff take on D'Lo Brown and Test, and my only standing memory of this match is my son asking me, why is his name Test? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I'm like, well, you and Mick Foley think the same. So whatever. Anything on
I
this
always
one?
like Test. I like Test. I like D'Lo Brown. I don't know why they were together.
Yeah. Test always had a good look. Test had a great look. I think in another era with different wrestlers, he's probably your champion. I don't think he got the mechanics of wrestling very well. And that might have been the problem.
I completely agree. I mean, you put Test in, 4 or 5 years earlier, and you've got your blonde Diesel. Really, don't you?
For sure.
But yeah, I mean, I like Test. I actually think I like Test entrance music. But I like D'Lo as well. I think D'Lo is very underrated at this point in time.
Sure.
I think he's one of the more solid hands on the card. And again, it falls into the Taka light heavyweight match from 14, and that this isn't bad. It's just not really got any era relevance compared to the rest of the show itself. So even compared to the hardcore and stuff.
So poor Bart Gunn. This was already documented. We talked about it on the Dark Side of the Ring when Pat and I covered that. Poor Bart Gunn had the utter misfortune of knocking out Jim Ross's best friend in Dr. Jet Steve Williams. Poor Bart Gunn had the unfortunate consequence of succeeding in a company that did not want him to succeed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it speaks volumes for the Brawl for All that you've got you have legitimate bare knuckle guys, legitimate UFC guys on your paid roster, and they stay the hell away from this gimmick. I think that says all that you really need to know about the Brawl for All as a concept, because these guys know that it's a fight, and anything can happen in a fight between any two people.
When you
I'm
hear
not
the story
I'm not saying
about
I beat Brock. I'm not saying that 1 in 1,000 times even I beat Brock Lesnar, but maybe 1 in 8 million. And if that just so happens to be the one time it's on TV,
It's such a funny thing. Like, if you hear the story of how like the Brawl for All came to be in its conception, what a petty place the WWE is to work. I don't like this asshole in the locker room talks big. What if he were in a real fight? What if I, who have a certain degree of power and control, put him in a real fight? Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
The idea is to sell tickets to a fake fight. Shut the fuck up, Vince Russo. Jesus Christ. You can't handle men acting like men. Maybe go work someplace else, asshole. And I found my clip for TikTok. Me calling Vince Russo an asshole. All right, moving on. So Butterbean knocks out Bart Gunn, embarrasses him, and he out of the company he goes. When you're there watching it live, it's a kind of a fun moment. But for any of us that had even a hopes that Bart Gunn was going to last even a minute with Butterbean, this was a giant waste of time.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who was coming into this pretty fresh at the point, I mean, I didn't know the Brawl for All was a thing going into this. So when I sort of watched this fresh for the first time, I was thinking, I mean, I've heard of Butterbean, this might be pretty entertaining. Thinking it was going to be kind of worked, I suppose. I thought this was going to be along the same lines as Piper, Mr. T, and wow, it's not.
No, sir.
This is just a man being punished in front of people.
Yep. There were a lot better ways to handle your human resources. This wasn't it.
Yeah, this is the worst slip in human resources until Daniel Puder.
Well done.
And there's my clip.
Yep. All right, so in your storyline match, you have Mankind defeating the Big Show to become the referee. This is watching this back. I had actually forgotten all about this, but this is the one where Big Show just loses his patience with Mankind and chokeslams him through the chair, and Vince McMahon's like, "That's not what I wanted, dumbass. I wanted you to be the ref to screw Austin, and you blew it, you big dummy." and Paul White's thinking in his head like, I quit WCW for this.
Yeah, and then he goes to a local law facility. Well, Mankind goes to a local medical facility.
Yes.
More on this later.
Yep. So we have Road Dogg defeating Goldust with the Blue Meanie, Ken Shamrock, and Val Venus for the Four Corners Intercontinental match. This is less than 10 minutes. This is, again, if you're watching Raw and it's contemporaneous, this is fine. You probably invested in this match. Watching it back, I was like, wait, what now? And it seemed like the whole focus of this was the incest angle they were trying to push with Ryan Shamrock and Ken Shamrock, which, ugh.
This is a guy who, 18 months prior to this could have been the face of the company.
Yeah.
And here we have him in a match that he had no influence on this match. You take Ken Shamrock out of this, aside from that stupid incest nonsense, and there's no point to him being there, really.
No.
I think the biggest thing about this and the hardcore match before it is, I think the writing was on the wall for the Outlaws as singles wrestlers before they tried it in earnest. I think they should have realized what they had at this point. I think this should have been the precursor to let's not split them up and give them their own things here, because maybe not.
So Kane with China defeats Triple H by DQ. This is, as you mentioned, this is the reunification of China and Triple H, only to break the whole thing up later. It's a match. Sable defeats Tori. I forgot who the hell Tori was. Like, she walked out and I'm like, who's this broad?
I'd like to see Cable versus Tori.
Who wouldn't? Was Tori anybody? Was she like an indie wrestler or something? What the hell was she?
I think that at the time, if memory serves me right, she had wrestling experience. She wasn't a Sports Illustrated model coming in,
right?
But I think she wasn't along the same lines of your Ivories or like later on, like Jazz or Victoria. So I think she had wrestling experience. She was picked as a kind of compromise of look plus ability. I think the most important thing that she did within the company really was a year later when she's paired in this awkward DX, but it's only X-Pac and Tori kind of nonsense that happens a year after this. But I thought she was
the
fine.
Best thing about that match was the Run DMC DX intro. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean you are completely correct there, completely correct. And the fact that she looked good in green, but
she did.
Yeah, this was a Sable vehicle, really. Yep. I think this is the one thing I would take off the card and not bother with, but then I made my feelings on Sable kind of clear to this point.
I'm sure there were people there that bought tickets to see Sable shake her ass, so it is what it is.
Definitely. There was always signs saying exactly that. It's definitely not for me to criticize.
Next up, we get Shane McMahon with Test defeating X-Pac for the European title. It's again, when you're watching it on. Go ahead.
I like this match. I think at this point, I think this is one of the more fun matches on the card at this point as well. First viewing of it, I didn't know that Shane McMahon wasn't a wrestler. I got the storyline and stuff, but yeah, it wasn't until afterwards when I realized more of what I know now, the sort of further appreciation that Shane was actually always pretty good. He was always pretty good in the ring.
Shane was better than he had any right to be.
I think this is a good, fun, gimmicky kind of match. And it was a vehicle to what happens afterwards, admittedly. But Shane proving to be quite a chicken shit heel. And the running away through the whole thing, especially from someone who, when you look at him, X-Pac's not a physically intimidating guy compared to other guys on the roster. I thought it was all pretty good. I stand by that. I think it holds up.
No, Shane always was better than any right to be. The problem I think with Shane is he's not a wrestler. He was a McMahon. He's a character in a storyline, and he's trying awful hard, and I give him a lot of credit for that. But there's always a wrestler out there that could have been in that spot. And
that's true, yeah.
And that's my big issue with him. But the other side of that is all anyone remembers about Shane is him diving off of high precipices. You know, they forget that he could actually
hold
hold
the ring match.
Yeah, they or SummerSlam where he yeeted off the fucking Titantron.
Yeah. I mean that's the thing is see now actually looking back at it, I think the biggest question mark around this match is how did Shane not squash him in seconds? Now I think about it, like Shane should not have been taking punishment from X-Pac. Yeah, I think he was doing the guy a favor selling for him.
So I love this next match. It's a terrible match, but I love the ending of it because it's so like if you want to see you want to see an ending to a match absolutely like elate and kill a crowd at the same time. I was there live for that, where so the Undertaker and Bossman have their match inside of a Hell in the Cell that they don't actually use. Like the Hell in the Cell was utterly irrelevant here, but they had it, they wanted to use it, so they did it. And then like, well, what are we gonna do with this? Well, who's gonna fall off this? And the Undertaker's like, I'm not doing that shit again. And Big Boss Man's like, I'm not going up there. Fuck you. And so like, okay, well, what do we hang you from it? Because here's what wrestling needed was a good old fashioned Texas hanging.
What's most remarkable about this is that it's still not the worst thing that happened to Boss Man in a cell. I think really the most remarkable thing about this is that being hung by the Brood, very obviously on a harness, is not the worst thing to happen to him inside the Hell of a Cell.
Yeah, I don't know how like they have to talk about these things. That whole sketch there had to be planned out, and they had to make sure he was going to be safe, which means this had to go through several meetings and conversations and safety protocols. And at no point did anyone say, we're going to have a basketball arena full of people and a worldwide audience on television at home. Do we really want to hang a guy with a noose in America?
Yeah, this is probably, and again, probably a fact check, but this is not long after the likes of Mississippi Burnings being released and things like that. Like this is just so bad in so many ways. Yeah. And again, like I don't even think it's his worst angle of the year either. I don't think it's the worst thing that happens to Boss Man in 1999.
I told my son about it. He left. I think after one of the matches, he was like, "Yeah, I'm kind of done with this for now. Call me back when they hang a guy." And I'm like, "You got it, buddy." So they hang the Boss Man, and he's watching, and he was like, and he kind of makes the crusty face, like, "Wait, what?" And then he's like, "So what happened after the Boss Man? Did he die?" And I'm like, "No, miraculously hanging him didn't kill him." But he will go
on Raw the next night. Fine.
Yeah. So here's what I tell my son, poor kid. I'm like, so the Boss Man will go on to do a lot of dastardly things. He will jump on top. He will steal a casket with Big Show's dead father in it and drive it away, Benny Hill style. And I was like, oh, and then there's the time he chopped up Al Snow's dog and served it to him as dinner and called it pepper steak. And my son, thinking I'm being serious that a dog had to die for this gimmick, thinks absolutely starts to cry and goes, I can't believe he killed a dog. That's too much. I'm like, whoa, easy, buddy, easy. It was a fiction.
Yeah.
Oof.
Yeah. I mean, wow. Wow. There should be a Dark Side of the Ring about that Kennel from Hell match. It should just be one about that. Just show the match in its entirety and then have one person just talk about it. I'd watch that.
The Kennel from Hell is my favorite Wrestle Crap moment by far. It is so bad.
I think it's actually it's that or the casket for me. I genuinely believe that it's one of the two. Both moments, including the Big Boss Man, which is just insane. Now we're talking about this. The hanging in the Hell in a Cell actually is pretty good. Now I think about it, one of the better things to happen to the guy in 1999.
That's a hell of a. I mean, like he doesn't die too long, like for real. Doesn't die too long after his run in the WWF, and it's like
2001 or 2, I believe.
Yeah.
No,
like what a way to go out in your career. It's like, so I'm gonna come back to the WWF and have this really great run as like this heel enforcer character, and I'm gonna get hung. I'm gonna kill a dog, and I'm gonna rob a corpse.
Yeah, it's like that's it. The guy was absolutely badass in the 6 months running up to this. And we'd mentioned earlier, like the Ministry of Darkness Undertaker, like still my only iteration of the Undertaker that I've ever truly really really liked was the Ministry of Darkness, and Yeah, just and the thing is, like Edge as well. Like Edge, this was his first
Mhm.
WrestleMania appearance. He's probably my favorite wrestler of all time,
Mhm.
and this is his first. His first thing is him, Christian, and Gangrel
Not a
badly struggling to kick a hole through a newly reinforced Hell in a Cell because we can't risk someone falling through it again. So actually, it's now extremely difficult to get a hole made in this structure. It's not even gimmicked for them. I don't think I remember hearing that.
yeah.
And they're just literally having to kick through enforced steel on a live pay-per-view broadcast.
Right.
It's
With
quickly
an
running out of
audience
time
of
for the segment.
families. There's an audience of families in the audience going, I just wanted to see a fun wrestling match.
Yeah.
Why
Do
are
you
we
know,
hanging people?
they should have the Brood should have brought out a casket. They should have raised the cell, put him in the casket, wheeled him off.
Right. Yeah.
Great. You know what? Put the casket on fire if you need to go. You need to go bigger. You know what I mean? Gimmick the bottom of the casket, put him under the ring, boom, set the thing on fire. There you go.
Or
Dastardly.
Or here's the thing: they come up through the mat and they pull the boss man down to hell. Done. Bob's your father. We're out of here.
Yeah, yeah.
This was utterly poor taste and unnecessary. And I laugh about it now, but I remember back then going,
yeah.
Why? I remember thinking to myself, like, why am I here? Why do I?
That would have worked, especially. I think that the Brood were doing the fire gimmick for their entrance at this stage. I believe. I think they've not been doing it long, but I mean, that's one way to put it over. Drag the boss man back down to hell in it. It's probably only going to work on a stadium ramp, really, into it, but not when you've just got the concrete floor under the tarpaulin or whatever they've laid out for the entrances. But yeah, a million different things they could have done that would have been just as
a million different things that aren't a hanging.
Yeah.
All right, and finally we have Steve Austin versus The Rock in the kicking out of a million. The first time really we see the kicking out of a million finishers match, which the first time you see it, it's awesome. When you see it for 20 years in every match after, in a Young Bucks match, not so much. But this is a neat no DQ match for the championship. The Corporation were banned at ringside. Mankind was a special guest referee. It's a lot. It's fun. It's a good time at the office. It was the culmination of a years-long story, told well, acted upon with great actors. What more can you say about it? Austin and The Rock are never going to be, like Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle, but they put on a fine show. And again, not everybody in the audience is a wrestling snob. So I'll give you the final word on WrestleMania 15, and then we are going to hit overdrive, get into WrestleMania 2000.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, WrestleMania 15 definitely the main event is definitely a smoke and mirrors, sizzle and steak sort of situation where they knew the limitations of the performers. They knew it was being carried on charisma over in-ring ability necessarily. It was the first time on this level you'd seen that kind of three stunners, three rock bottoms, kick out finishers, all that sort of stuff. And for my money, this is the best of their three Mania matches for me personally. I just think that for the importance, for the storyline up to it, I know that 17's got the I need to beat you rock, and it's a better promo package, put it that way. But this for me is my favorite of the trilogy, and yeah, I think it was a great way to top off the event.
They were both
as you
young
said, this kicks it in.
They were both young and spry here. This isn't like 19 where Austin's being held together by tiny pieces of chalk. This isn't 17 with the horseshit ending. You're right. This is the first and best of the chapters between these three, between the three matches. All right, so that's it. Austin's the champion again, and now it's year 2. We're into the second book of the Austin reign. We're at Backlash 1919. Jesus Christ, what's wrong with me?
Backlash 99.
Thank you. Backlash 99. So you can tell I've been doing this too long. And this is Steve Austin and The Rock in a no holds barred match with Shane McMahon as the referee. The Undertaker versus Ken Shamrock. Triple H versus X-Pac. Mankind versus The Big Show in the Boiler Room Brawl. Honestly, I barely remember this. But I remember the build up to it. I remember a lot of the fun stuff The Rock was doing to antagonize Steve Austin. It's fine, but we're doing more of what we've been doing. We move on to No Mercy. That's the UK pay-per-view. Okay. Over the Edge. look, I don't want to derail the entire podcast by talking about something that needs a long time to talk about. Pat and I covered it already when we talked about the Owen Hart Dark Side of the Ring. All anyone's ever going to remember about Over the Edge is Owen Hart dying in an accident that didn't need to happen.
Yeah. The thing is, it's not. There's no real high points on the show, even taking that out. And I don't want to make it into a wrestling conversation about that show, because it certainly shouldn't be. But I mean, there's nothing of relevance really happens, I don't feel, on it.
Nope. Whatever was supposed to happen on that show, they whatever was supposed to happen with the main event, what does happen is that the Undertaker defeats Steve Austin in a singles match to win the WWF Championship. The Rock defeats Triple H by DQ, and then that's it. The less said about this one, the better. Moving on, we go to the King of the Ring, 1999. Vince McMahon. Oh, this is the infamous ladder match where we still to this day, like, we don't know who did GTV. We don't know who there's so many mysteries in the WWF. Who moved the cat? Who moved the briefcase? That's the question. Steve Austin goes for the briefcase. Someone goes whoop, and Steve Austin's like, what the hell? And it was for, I think, a WWF contract at the time, and he doesn't get it. Vince McMahon and Shane end up defeating Steve Austin. The Undertaker defeats The Rock for the WWF Championship. Again, it was a show. More another chapter in the long reigning chapter of these people. We go to Fully Loaded, 1999. We have Steve Austin, who I guess had become champion along the road there, defeating The Undertaker in a first blood match. Due to The Undertaker losing, Vince McMahon could no longer appear on WWF television. If Austin lost, he would have never had another shot at the WWF Championship. Triple H with China defeats The Rock in a fully loaded strap match for the number one contendership to the WWF Championship at SummerSlam. Yeah, we're building towards Triple H being pushed into the main event. That's the whole point of this whole summer feud, is we're trying to get Triple H into the main event scene for the first time, which takes us to SummerSlam in Minneapolis. This is the Mankind, Steve Austin, Triple H triple threat match with your special guest referee, Governor Jesse Ventura.
Yeah.
Mankind ends up winning so that we can build towards our next big feud. And so he's your WWF champion again, which takes us to Unforgiven. We have Triple H defeating the Big Show, the British Bulldog, Kane, Mankind, and The Rock in a 6-pack challenge for the WWF Championship. And so again, we're firm. I guess the point of all of this was we were eventually going to get to Triple H versus The Rock in WrestleMania, but I guess by the time we got there, no one was convinced those two were going to be able to sell that show on their own.
Yeah,
and the underlying thing
of a lot of hot shotting between these cards.
Yeah. After SummerSlam is No Mercy, which we talked about earlier. This is Triple H defeats Stone Cold in an Anything Goes WWF match. The Rock defeats the British Bulldog. This is just because you mentioned it earlier, then this is like honestly, this is the only thing now that I'm looking at it is the only thing I really remember about this whole match is China defeating Jeff Jarrett in the Good Housekeeping garbage match.
Oh, was that? Oh man, I thought I was absolutely certain that was a fully loaded. Oh well.
That is
everything I know is a lie.
Match. Yeah,
it is really good fun
match. It's
probably and the highlight of Jeff Jarrett's WWE career.
It's up there. The best thing about that match to me is knowing that Jeff Jarrett signed a 1-day extension or whatever it was to get it done, and that he got a ridiculous payday out of it. I don't hate the WWF. I don't hate Vince McMahon. They brought a lot of joy to my life. But anytime a wrestler, as mistreated as some of the wrestlers are, anytime one of them really gets over on Vince and there's nothing Vince can do about it, anytime he takes a little shot in the bum, I'm here for it. And Jeff Jarrett gave him a shot in the bum there. Yeah, a little bit of humble pie.
That was the money to start up his own promotion. That was this one match. Very important in the big picture. That match. Also, it had the ladder match, tag team ladder match between Edge and Christian and the.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the finale of the tit tournament.
Which the tit tournament, God Almighty, which is in its own way sort of important to the build to WrestleMania. as well.
Absolutely is. It's a very good point, Stewart. Because without that, we don't have what comes after, and what comes after is monumental in WrestleMania history.
Yeah.
So that's No Mercy 1999, which takes us to the Survivor Series 1999. Your matches here are: you have the Big Show defeating Triple H and The Rock in a triple threat match. You have China defeating Chris Jericho for the Intercontinental title, which was a big deal at the time.
At least he wasn't coming out to Judas.
Yeah. And that takes us to Armageddon. I'm getting out of here. Triple H. This is a monumental show. You have Triple H defeating Mr. McMahon, and this is the onset of the McMahon-Helmsley era, because at this point, I don't think Triple H was really working on TV as a main event heel. He had been the Game, and he had like that weird techno music, and no one really bought it. It's here where Triple H really has his own character. Him and Stephanie as the McMahon-Helmsley era. People hate it, but you were supposed to hate it, so it works. It did exactly what it was supposed to do. But it's another cog in place for the big McMahon family feud that's going to dominate WrestleMania 2000. Big Boss Man Big Show defeats the Big Boss Man. We talked about what led up to that, the unfortunate casket incident. And the Rock and Sock connection of Mankind and The Rock defeat the New Age Outlaws for the tag team by disqualification. That takes us to the Royal Rumble 2000, which the match is sort of incidental. What's really important here is the street fight between Triple H and Cactus Jack. This was
incidental. Tell that to Taka Michinoku's face.
Fair enough.
It's my favorite bump in wrestling history.
This is the debut of Taz. With Taz and Kurt Angle have like a really short, but for what they did, pretty cool match. You have the Hardy Boys defeating the Dudley Boys in a tables match, which again is important for what's going to happen next. You have Chris Jericho and defeating China and Hardcore Holly for the Intercontinental title. And then again, you have Triple H and Cactus Jack in a street fight, which was awesome, by the way. This was at Madison Square Garden. I was not at this one. Was this Madison Square Garden?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yes, and then The Rock.
The first wrestling pay-per-view I watched live on TV, incidentally, because Channel 4 in the UK carried it, and it was the first time I was able to actually sit up and watch it live. So yeah, another show that I love for nostalgia / sentimentality reasons. So yeah.
And then The Rock defeats the Big Show. So The Rock wins the Royal Rumble. So that's that. Then we go to No Way Out, which is tremendous. And it's tremendous because, again, another thing that solidifies Triple H's character, really gives him some dimension, some personality. This is where we start to see the mallet happening. This is where they do the Hell in the Cell, and the Hell in the Cell becomes like ingrained as part of his character. Him and Cactus Jack have a phenomenal Hell in the Cell match, one of the better ones. Yeah. And then the Big Show defeats The Rock to determine the number one contender for the WWF Championship. So again, we have four guys all sort of orbiting the WWE title around this time. And that brings us to finally, Chris Bailey. WrestleMania 2000 or WrestleMania 16, which is okay. A lot of things are happening around this time. Again, we're having more jumps over to the WWF than we are to WCW, which is a dying company by this point. It's on its last. This is sort of, speeding towards its demise. WCW is, and so a lot of people are jumping ship, and so we get the influx of the Radicals, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, who are going to be big time players going forward. Perry Saturn, not so much, and Dean Malenko is going to be an agent. But they're here for this pay-per-view. Chris Jericho, who had jumped over by this point, is a big deal and is a big time player in the WWF mid-card scene. You get the inaugural tables ladder. You get the inaugural 3-man ladder match, which eventually becomes tables, ladders, and chairs by SummerSlam. So while the matches themselves are not great, in a lot of cases, the event itself is a very important one in the history of the WWE. Not to mention, this is also one where I think they had like no celebrities, and Vince McMahon is quoted as saying, "Yeah, after everything that's happened to this company since the end of the Hogan era, after everything that happened with the New Generation and the steroid trial, to finally be the top company in the world again by a long stretch. The celebrities of this one are the wrestling stars themselves.
Yeah,
which is a nice sentiment.
I think it was only Ice-T that was a sort of celebrity endorsement at this, if I remember correctly. He they'd done, was it the Ruthless Aggression CD? No, it wouldn't have been by that point. It was another one, but they'd done the crossover kind of remix album where they had, Ice-T doing the Pimpin' Ain't Easy, and they had like the Run DMC DX theme that you mentioned earlier on. That was one of the better versions of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, like that was the bigger thing on that, and that probably cross promotion to sell an album at the most part. But
it's also like a very Vince Russo pay-per-view, where Vince Russo's philosophy allegedly was everyone should have an angle. If you're on the roster, you should have an angle, which I think goes in conflict with how Bruce Pritchard and Vince McMahon felt. But that was what was the leading philosophy of the time. And if you look at this WrestleMania, every match does have an angle, whether it needed to be there or not.
It's very crowded. I mean, I think that if you look at like the hardcore battle royal, especially, it's probably the first real example, going back to whichever early WrestleMania had that kind of weird battle royale thing in it. But it's one of the sort of big examples of what would follow in terms of everyone gets the Mania pay-per-view, the Mania payday rather, that we'd see with the Andre battle royale and later years, and multi-man ladder matches like Money in the Bank, just for having more guys on the card. And as a result, it's very bloated. It's quite the opposite. You mentioned that WrestleMania 14 was very lean. This is quite the opposite. There's not a traditional singles match on this card.
Right.
And as a result, it does feel very overbooked, and it does feel very
I don't love this
training.
WrestleMania. It's an important WrestleMania for everyone that's on it and what it means to the company and everything that happens after. But watching it was a fucking chore. So we start off with the Boss Man and Bull Buchanan versus the Godfather and D'Lo Brown with Ice-T and the O Train, which was fun. You have the hardcore battle royal, which was just such a silly thing, but it was awesome to watch at the time.
Yeah, they cocked up the ending quite obviously as well.
Yeah,
they mistimed the ending, but it was a payoff that we needed, and it was good fun throughout it. So I think that it's really being a bit nitpicky, really. But knowing Hardcore Holly and his philosophy on things, he probably kicked a dog on his way home that night just to make himself feel better.
Sure. You have starting matches that didn't need to be here. TNA of Test and Albert with Trish Stratus defeating Head Cheese of Al Snow and Steve Blackman.
I like them as a pairing. I mean, probably not for the WrestleMania card. I mean, the whole thing, like Chester McCheesington and stuff, like good fun. Definitely a bit for the kids. But it didn't need to be. It didn't need to be here. Sunday Night Heat, sure. Not main card. Too much nonsense.
That is look. I loved Head Cheese as a fun idea, and it absolutely should be on Raw. It did not need to be on any pay-per-view ever. Then you have the Triangle Ladder match, which would eventually become TLC between Edge and Christian, Dudley Boys, and the Hardy Boys, where Jeff Hardy began a long line of events where he nearly kills himself. This was, Edge. I think this is the one where Edge does the spear off the ladder.
No, that's 17.
Oh, was it a 17? Okay. I can't remember what big stunt happens other than Jeff going off the ladder.
This particular one is more. I'd probably say it's a more work rate of the sort of trilogy. Because they were coming off the Royal Rumble. They'd had the tables match with the Dudleys at the Royal Rumble. The Hardys, obviously. I mean, and this was just. I think it was more trying it on the big stage. There was no big moments, I wouldn't say, so much in this match. A lot of carnage, very very exciting, fast paced, quite short comparatively as well, if I remember right, without looking at the actual timings of the match. But the big thing of it was the sort of the ending. It was the structure that they'd created in the middle. Again, that's not really been seen. It's certainly not in a WWE event at that point. Was Edge and Christian had the table flat out at the top of the ladders, celebrating on it, and it was the spectacle of it, and it was great, but absolutely overshadowed by what followed it the following year. It was probably overshadowed by what happened at SummerSlam.
I was for sure overshadowed by what happened at SummerSlam.
And I would also probably say that it's weaker than either the No Mercy ladder match or the Rumble tables match. But for a WrestleMania match, it was spectacle.
Do you watch did you watch Ruthless Aggression on Peacock this second season at the very least?
Yeah, I've seen the second series of it. Yeah.
So I love the episode of the first Women's Revolution, and thinking back to like the kind of kvetching that goes on in that episode about how the women were just treated as like valets and sex objects, and they really weren't given a chance to work. And I was like, I don't remember being that bad. And then I watched this, the Cat versus the horny she-devil, Terry Runnels. It gagged me with a spoon. Oi.
Yeah. I mean, the thing with
I was embarrassed for women since the dawn of time on that one.
Kat had a fun backstage segment. I think the one thing rewatching this for this show, I really think my takeaway of it is that I think that Jerry King Lawler is better not on commentary anymore. Like, I really do. I think he's definitely a product of the Attitude Era. I think he outstayed his welcome by a long shot. I think that it's fine for what it is then, but it's like if you compare it to like a Carry On movie or something like that. Like, it was okay then because that's how the world was. It doesn't have a place in modern society anymore. That's what I think of Jerry Lawler's commentary through this show, especially.
Jim Cornette. I want to go off on a tangent here, but Jim Cornette like bags on Excalibur from AEW, and we all hate Michael Cole, and over the years there have been some truly awful commentating, and there's been some really good ones. But like, I listen to Jerry Lawler, and I go back even to like the early '90s when he was there. By this point, he really is just utterly useless. Like, he adds nothing to the commentary. Like, Jim Ross is solid and always has been solid, and you always get the feeling that Jim Ross was genuinely reacting to what was happening in front of him. Jerry the King Lawler looks like he had his box of phrases that he yelled, and that was about it.
Yeah, puppies.
Jerry Lawler sucks by 2000.
Yes, definitely. Can't disagree at all.
Kat and Terry, this is 3 minutes of my life I'd rather have back. I think Kat, in the fun little backstage thing she does where she's naked and they're doing the Austin Powers thing of delicately covering up her naughty parts. That's fine. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, quite funny. Only one-on-one match on the card as well. Only one-on-one match.
Didn't need her in her stripper outfit wrestling Terry Runnels, who clearly is not a wrestler.
Well, you say didn't need it.
I mean,
it was. Yeah, I mean, I'll
nice
watch it again, and I won't be proud of it, but I'll watch it again.
Sure. Late at night, wife's gone to sleep, doesn't want to be woken up. I can absolutely see watching that again. Absolutely.
Yeah.
China and Too Cool versus the Radicals. They were hip at the time. They were a thing that's happening. It was all fine. They all needed to be there at that time. Like, you look back on it, like, why does this need to be here? Because at the time, those were the more popular wrestlers on the roster.
This eventually led to a T-shirt that said "Vagina" on it. This awesome match. So, I mean, it's got that going for it. If you wanted a T-shirt that said "I'd rather be in Vagina,"
sure,
brilliant marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one's really good. It's one of the better matches on the card. Benoit, Jericho, and Angle, who are awesome together, and I think at least some or all of them would be part of the SmackDown 7 in years to come. Just a great, good old fashioned, solid wrestling match. And this was awesome as an Angle because Kurt Angle loses both of his titles and doesn't get pinned or submitted nary once.
Yeah.
So awesome storytelling here.
It was great. And I mean, I think his only loss to that point had come at the Royal Rumble from Taz. So I think it was his aside from that, it was his only loss. And obviously he declared shenanigans on his Taz loss too. So it kept his kind of streak intact in a capacity. We knew he'd been beaten. He'd lost at the Rumble. He'd lost his belts at this match, but he could defend his own unbeaten record. I was choked out by an illegal hold. I was never pinned to lose my belts. So he gave him that continual arrogance, which led, more and more to the "you suck" stuff, which led in turn to his main event push by the end of this year as well. So yeah, solid stuff. Great fun match. Probably the best work rate match on the card, I'd say.
Well, Stewart, I'll tell you, the next thing that we're going to talk about, the best thing about it is the Run DMC remix of the Degeneration theme song. I still have it blaring in my head. It's the only memorable thing about this. And if you want to, I'll tell you, Run DMC are, they are not only the kings of rock, but one of the great hip hop groups in the entire length and breadth of the history of rap music. And if you would like to experience Run DMC as I did as a child, with Raising Hell and King of Rock and Tougher Than Leather and all these great albums that they put out, do you know where, Stewart, you could experience the length and breadth of Run DMC's catalog for free?
Where's that?
We're doing a plug. Stay with me, brother.
Oh, yeah. Cool. Where?
At Amazon Music Unlimited, don't you understand? We are giving away a free 30-day trial of the Amazon Music Unlimited service. If you click the link in this podcast, get the description of this podcast, Jesus. Get AmazonMusic.com/W2M Network. Again, it's get AmazonMusic.com/W2M Network for your free 30-day trial of the Amazon Music Unlimited service. Over 70 million songs, including the entire Run DMC catalog. You might even find their cover of Degeneration-X, which is fantabulastic. Click the link, agree to the service. You have it for 30 days. It's fantastic. If you don't like it, I don't know why you wouldn't, but if you don't, you can cancel it any time. No fuss, no muss, no contracts. If you keep it, it's comparable to the price of Spotify or Apple Music. It's just a great service. We use it all the time on the Metal Hammer of Doom and all of the podcasts in between. So check out the link, get AmazonMusic.com/W2M Network. It helps us out. It helps you out. Who doesn't like free music? Do you like free music, Stewart?
Absolutely.
Who doesn't?
Legal free music.
That's right. Legal free music. With free music without malware. Which brings us to Kane and Rikishi versus DX. And this was, again, an excuse to play fun music and have Rikishi shove his ass into Pete Rose's face, into Tori's face, and to have Rikishi dance at the end. Which this was an era where you came to watch Steve Austin and you came to watch Rikishi dance for some odd reason. That's what was happening in the world at the time.
I forgot about Kane and Rikishi being a tag team when I watched this back, and I honestly, there's part of me thinks they don't tag again after this. I mean, the fact that Kane doesn't dance, I get why he doesn't. It probably would have been more damaging than the Pete Rose stuff before his WrestleMania 14 match, but it's a bit of a missed opportunity, much like not putting him in green when he tagged with X-Pac, but there we are.
Yeah. It's so funny that like 2 years ago, he's in the co-main against The Undertaker in a blood feud. 2 years later, he's in a gimmick match with a fat guy that dances and shoves his ass into people's faces.
Yeah.
Like if you Glenn Jacobs, like suppose you're just happy to have a job, but
that's true.
The ups and downs of Kane's history deserves its own documentary. All right, and then finally, this beleaguered, tortured McMahon family feud that drove everybody crazy at the time. I do remember there being like a visceral online hate for this angle. Like, can we not do the McMahons everywhere in every aspect of the show? Is there any way we could just have some wrestling without the McMahon? No, McMahons all the time, everywhere. That's the whole focus of the show now. It's the McMahon hour.
Yeah.
If you say so, maybe someone will fall off a ladder. And that's I mean, it's four guys trying real hard to put on an entertaining match. Everyone kind of working in concert effort to make up for the fact that there's no Steve Austin.
Yeah,
it's okay. It's honestly, it's work rate wise, it's fine. It's probably mid-tier WrestleMania main event in terms of like star power and like genuine interest in the show. This was one of those deals where I was interested in the show and not the match. And that's kind of my final word on WrestleMania 2000. I'll give you the final word now.
Mine would probably be that I think that they were unfortunate that they didn't start the Triple H Mankind Mick Foley saga a month prior to when they did, Because I think that if you put their street fight, I know the importance of it happening at the Garden, blah blah blah. But if you put that match and the propulsion of Triple H as King of the Heels at this stage, if you start that in December, the Royal Rumble, you then have somehow you manage to have their Hell in a Cell match or their retirement match for Mick Foley, to further cement him as the big bad bastard of the era. This match would have been good as it is, as it plays out in between that. So you have that in the road to WrestleMania, with the WrestleMania being the WrestleMania main event, then being what we eventually get at Backlash the following month, where you finally get the payoff, you finally get The Rock getting the belt back and having the big baby face win. Because this match, in terms of the era, it's overbooked, which is fine for the most part, but you know, the heel win for the first time in Mania history, and just the cloudiness of it all, you know, the fact that it was so focused on the McMahons rather than the talent almost, was just, I don't think it was as fitting. And I think that if we slid this event one forward and you put even Backlash itself as a show in the Mania slot, I think it actually works much better as a finale to the biggest show of the year. Anyway, I feel like it was more of an organic payoff to the booking that we'd had to this point.
Well, Stewart, I appreciate you coming. Unfortunately, Pat messaged me during the show saying that there was a personal incident he had to deal with, so he couldn't be here. Chris Bailey couldn't be here because he had a work obligation that he could not get out of. But I'm very happy, number one, that you were able to make it, because since you were such big fans of these shows, we had almost a 3-hour conversation. Could you imagine if there were 2 other people here?
Oh, I know.
This worked out better than I could have possibly imagined. But no, hey man, it's been great. This has been it was a long show, and I'm sorry I kept you longer than I said I would, but it was a fun conversation. I really had a good time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I had a great time being on. Thanks so much for having me. And if we can work something out again, to get me back in future, I'd also be happy to talk about wrestling with you guys. But yeah, thanks so much. And sorry I missed the Amazon Music plug, but other than that, it's been great fun. And yeah, thanks very much for having me to defend the Attitude Era as only I can.
Sure. That's a great way to really end the show, because you know, people look back on this stuff and I think they look back on it with modern eyes, and it's like, no, you must understand the importance of these 3 shows. That's why we spend so much time on them. You know, if they didn't mean as much, I wouldn't spend almost 3 hours on this. But when you think about what's going to happen in the years to come, none of those things happen without these 3 shows. And so it's an important era in the history of professional wrestling and WWE specifically. With that said, the next time will be in February. We're just going to look at WrestleMania 17, and we're just going to focus on WrestleMania 17 as a standalone show, because we really do have to talk about the end of the Monday Night War and the death of WCW. And so that'll be February 23rd at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard. Hopefully Chris and Pat will be back, or there won't be a show. In the meantime, for all your wrestling stuff, my son and I did a alternative commentary for Beach Break last night. We had lots of fun, and it's when Danhausen showed up and I was shaking my son going, "It's Danhausen." My son's like, "What the hell is a Danhausen?"
Very nice, very evil.
Yes.
Does he not watch Shikara? No,
he does not. Nor did he watch Ring of Honor. So we had a lot of fun with that. My son's always fun to watch wrestling with. He always has some brilliant thing that he says for an elementary school child. But this Saturday, for all you serious wrestling fans who take wrestling seriously, there will not be a elementary school age child doing commentary, but rather myself, Chris Bailey, and Chris Sheehan doing a alternative commentary for the entire Royal Rumble event. So check that out. When the show goes live at, I think it's 8 o'clock, then so do we, and we'll be there with you for the entire 4+ hour event. We've also got reviews of Battle of the Belts. We'll have an alternative commentary for the Elimination Chamber coming up in Saudi Arabia. So check all of that out as well. For those of you who like MMA, Dan Lasby and I just did a commentary for the entire main card of UFC 270. That's up in the archives along with all of our boxing coverage from last year. So check that out. Tonight, Ronnie Adams is back. We're going to talk the Wheel of Time. On Monday, he and I did a triple feature for Power of the Dog, The French Dispatch, and Cop Shop. Robert Winfrey and I talked Munich, The Edge of War, plus we did our year-end review in terms of movie box office, finance, all that stuff. Last night, after I was done with my son, my Jesse Starcher, Robert Cooper, and I reviewed the Night Flight Orchestra. Gavin Napier, forgot to mention this earlier, Gavin Napier will be doing a commentary for me, just the Royal Rumble 1992 event itself, because he loves himself some Ric Flair and some 1992 Royal Rumble. So we're going to watch the Royal Rumble, and we're going to comment on it for your listening pleasure. And that's it. That's it for the week that was. So for Stewart Lang, formerly of 401 Mania, or currently at 401mania.com, I'm Mark Radulich. Be well, be safe, and behave.